In modern Japan, the protagonist stumbled into a forest like it shouldn't even exist, staring in disbelief as the world opened up around them. As one of the main protagonists, Amada Shiru sized up the chaos, kicked things off by telling everyone who he was, and admitted he'd only just moved into his grandmother's place. Then, the moment he stepped into the altar room, he uncovered a doorway to another world, and his mind practically refused to believe it. At first, he figured it had to be a weird phenomenon, or his mind playing tricks, especially after he'd just ditched a brutal, stress-fueled job. When he yanked the closet doors open, a whole other world spilled out behind them, and now he couldn't stop thinking about his grandmother's vanishing from 7 years ago, a mystery they only finally labeled last month. The protagonist found himself back in his childhood, remembering how he'd pepper his grandmother with questions about her secret, only for her to grin and swear it wasn't really that secret at all. He used to rage at her for keeping that secret locked away, promising she'd spill it only when he got older, and then, before she ever told him, his grandmother died, leaving him stuck with one haunting memory. For throwing the double peace pose, while he was still spiraling over her mystery, he suddenly noticed a hidden letter sitting right in front of her portrait, and his curiosity went nuclear. Was it finally her will? He had no idea his grandmother was secretly a magician who'd slipped into Japan from the other world of Ruffatio 80 years ago, and the letter hit him with 6 massive clues. First, it revealed the closet was a secret portal straight into Ruffatio, and once you stepped in, you'd find a whole realm packed with magic skills and peculiar powers. Monstrous predators prowled the streets of Ruffatio, and the city was packed with races beyond humans. Plus, the letter tucked inside the envelope promised a ring that would let the protagonist understand Ruffatio's language, and the last command was clear. Where the ring and read, the book stashed behind the altar. That letter told him everything would click the moment he got there, so he swallowed his doubts, until the flood of information hit him and he blurted out that it was way too much to handle. Then, while he dug deeper, he spotted a ring and 2 books tucked behind the altar, but the second he tried to read them, he realized he couldn't make out a single word of their language. A lightning bolt of memory hit him, to where was the missing key to deciphering the ring's book. Once he finished the task, he finally understood what it said, and that shocked him wide awake. Sure, the ring let him read the language, but the meaning still left him uneasy. Then, boom, a voice cut in. He just unlocked a skill called *equivalent exchange ***. The protagonist froze at the voice, scrambling to figure out who it was. Then, piece by piece, he swallowed the truth. He'd just unlocked a skill, the same kind you'd see in light novels or video games. He also snagged the skill inventory, and every time he unlocked a new skill, he blurted out in pure awe. Then, with the book finally finished, he paced and wondered what to do next, and whether he should leap into another world using his new powers. He replayed his grandmother's words in his head, "You'll finally get it when you're in another world, ***," and the meaning just wouldn't click, leaving him totally lost. She always pushed him to get out and explore, but it was already late, and tomorrow he had to hit the home center to pick up a few things. Staring at his grandmother's portrait, he let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, and then he made. He chose to head there and dive straight into an adventure once he stepped into that other world. He finally realized this town wasn't so bad after all. Then the non-stop walking hit him, and suddenly he was starving. As he strolled past a meat shop, a stranger swooped in and tried to sell him a skewer for a steal, so the curious guy leaned in and asked what meat was inside. The shopkeeper leaned in and told him it was rabbit meat, then offered the whole thing for just 3 bronze coins. He groaned that he didn't have the cash on him right then and apologized, and the shopkeeper just nodded, saying he was there for the meat and nothing more. Even with that skewer looking mouthwatering, he turned away and kept moving down the road. Later, he shoved his hand into his pocket, and boom, there it was, $4,200 in Japanese currency, the exact change he'd snagged from a convenience store earlier. He tried to use those yen to grab the skewer, but right in front of his eyes, his cash flipped into bronze coins. He stared in disbelief as everything happening to him blew past his worst nightmare. Determined to get answers, he marched back to the skewer shop, flashed his bronze coins at the shopkeeper and demanded, "Is this what you meant?" The shopkeeper nodded and said it was the exact same kind of coin he'd mentioned before. Then the protagonist's eyes widened, because he finally understood he had the power of equivalent exchange. Shaking himself out of his thoughts, he asked the shopkeeper for 3 skewers, only to get hit with a price tag of 8 bronze coins because he'd trekked all the way here, and the protagonist, still grateful, thanked him for being so kind. Since it was his first meal in this new world, he expected magic, but the skewer came out totally plain, with 0 seasoning. While he wrestled with the chaos of his equivalent exchange, he couldn't stop wondering, could he flip those coins back into Japanese yen? He asked the coins to transform. Then, to his total shock, they actually snapped back into the older currency. So with the equivalent exchange trick, he could swap currencies between worlds, meaning if he raked in a fortune over there, Japan would see the same rich life too. The protagonist stared at the skill's raw power in disbelief, then launched into a risky test by throwing in $10,000. He blinked in disbelief as the dollars morphed into shiny silver coins that looked like pure silver. Then he hurried back to the same meat shopkeeper to ask if he could use one, only for the shopkeeper to snap back that he must have run out of bronze coins since he couldn't make change for silver. One bronze coin was worth $100, but one silver coin cost a whopping $10,000 in Japanese dollars. Right now, the main character's sitting on 2 shiny silver coins and 34 bronze coins, and then they start asking, can I trade this as $150 and $1 zero bills? Since in that country, the bronze coin is the absolute smallest unit. The main character blurted out that the shopkeeper's reaction said it all. The money they brought had to be enough to let them roam all over the town. They decided to explore, and right away they tripped into a bustling marketplace, eager to chat with everyone, especially that girl rocking cat ears. The moment everyone's eyes snapped to the main character, the whole crowd started wondering, should they grab new clothes too, because what they were wearing looked totally weird in this world. As they headed for the clothing shop, a young girl rushed up with a bucket of flowers and asked them straight up if they wanted to buy some. He couldn't believe it, there was a kid out there selling flowers, so he asked her the price, and she smiled and said one bunch would cost 3 bronze coins. The main character asked if 2 bronze coins would cover it, and she snapped back that 1 coin was enough, just don't overcharge her. Then the main character asked to buy the yellow one and tossed her 3 bronze coins on the spot. Ashamed, the young girl blurted, "Is it too expensive?" And the main character smiled, waving it off like, "It's totally okay, this is what we wanted." Thought she could just get him to give, but once it started, he turned the tables and asked about the details of that whole world. She nodded and he dove right in. "What's your name?" She lit up on the spot and blurted, "Aina." He then introduced himself as Shiro and said how thrilled he was to finally meet her. Her eyes narrowed, then he blurted his next question. What was the town's name? She looked baffled, but he quickly shot back that he was just a traveler, not some stranger trying to pry. Eventually, she finally spilled the town's name, Ninatik, right there in Gil's kingdom, and when he found out, he thanked her like she'd just handed him treasure. In Ninatik, the money came in 3 forms. 100 bronze coins made 1 silver, and 100 silver coins stacked into 1 gold. In that town, the average paycheck could hit 8 silver coins a month, but gold coins were so rare that only a handful of people even owned them. And even with someone as young as Aina, she still had to lock in the business deals ahead of time with the local government. Suddenly, he spun back toward her and demanded 10 more flowers. Could she really sell him that many? She froze, stunned by how serious he sounded, but he didn't back down. 1 flower wouldn't cut it, he needed enough to actually decorate. Handing him 30 copper coins, she broke into a grateful smile and thanked him. Then the protagonist finally got it. His grandmother would be thrilled by what he did, but he totally forgot Aina was still standing right there. So he quickly told her not to worry, thanked her for the gorgeous flowers, and Aina lit up, shouting how happy she was that he truly appreciated them. The protagonist grabbed her attention and demanded directions to the government office. Aina generously offered to take him there, and now we're right back in the action. Ine ushered the protagonist straight into the government office and declared they'd arrived. Then he asked, worried, if a foreigner like him could even go in. Ine shot back that it was totally okay because everyone inside was incredibly kind. After that, the protagonist strode into the building, and a grandmother greeted him right away, looking downright terrifying. She asked, "So you're from another country?" And he nodded, confirming it without hesitation. After that, she told him during business hours to write down his name and spell out exactly how he'd sell his goods. Then she laid out his 3 choices: be a hawker and pay 20 bronze coins a day, which she said was about $1,000 in Japanese dollars. She told him he could pick one of 3, either a peddler deal that cost the same, or a shipowner contract where he had to pay 3 silver coins a day, about $30,000, then gave him a 10-day trial to decide. With that ring letting him understand any language, the protagonist picked option 2 for the next 5 days, starting tomorrow, and when he turned in the contract, the old lady couldn't help but remark on his strange name. He figured making $1,000 a day was a steal, since he could even open a shop at a flea market around Tokyo for about $3,000. He felt relieved it was cheap in that world, until it hit him. He had zero clue what the market prices were. The lady told him the mayor set the prices for the town's benefit, and that's why it was so affordable. Then she wished him luck, and he thanked her, because the whole thing was done in about 15 minutes, smooth as butter. He was totally stunned by how easy it went, and he told Aina he'd head back to the market, thanking her again for the help. Right as he headed for the market, she burst out, snapped that he was headed the wrong way, and pointed him straight to the right route. At the market, she leaned in and demanded, "So, did you finally figure out what you're selling tomorrow?" At first, he started worrying about his merchandise, then admitted he hadn't even thought that far yet and still felt lost, so she told him he could sell stuff for adventurers, because the town was packed with them. She peered through the bustling market and realized half the crowd looked like they'd stepped straight out of an adventure, gear, outfits, the whole vibe. Then he finally understood the truth. Those monsters in the forest were the reason, and he counted himself lucky he escaped alive. When Aina finally turned back to him, she nodded and said selling stuff to adventurers sounded perfect. Then she admitted bitterly that because of it her flowers were barely selling at all. Kairat swept in and bought tons of flowers from her, and her whole world lit up. Later that day, she told everyone how grateful she was to have finally met him. She even teased him so hard he started blushing like crazy. Then she offered to show him around the market, and he jumped at the chance. She let him pass the lantern and flint shop, the cape and sleeping bag spot, the knife and whetstone stall, and tons more. The protagonist couldn't stop himself. He blurted out in awe at how packed the place was with adventurers' goods for sale. Ine even dragged him to the preserve food shop, and he couldn't help thinking she was such a good kid, someone who'd make an amazing wife someday. She kept dragging him shop to shop, pointing out lantern oil, steaming stew, and everything else they could buy, while deep down, the protagonist's heart was set on one thing, a beautiful wife and a daughter, and he wanted them fast. Stuck in his own head, Ine tried to drag him back, asking if he'd finally decided what he was going to sell after all the shops she showed him, and then he leaned in and whispered something straight into her ear. The next day rolled in and he had to hustle and set his goods up for sale. Then Anya burst into the scene, grinning, and hit him with a cheerful good morning. He asked if she'd be selling flowers that day, and she said yes, because she'd already gotten up early to harvest them. The protagonist stared at the gorgeous flowers, then grinned and promised Aina they'd sell a ton that day, and Aina lit up, saying she'd use the money to buy medicine for her mother. As they pushed on to sell their wares, Aina kept running into trouble getting the flowers off her hands. Even so, the protagonist pumped her up, promising she'd nail the sale for sure. While the moment was still buzzing, an adventurer rushed up to the protagonist and demanded to know what he was selling. The adventurer squinted at the paper box and guessed it was some handmade trick, but the protagonist cut in fast. Inside were matches, tiny bits of wood that could spark to life, so the adventurer confessed he'd never even heard of matches and demanded, "How can little wood possibly make fire?" In response, the protagonist slammed the wood against the surface, and it burst into flames. The young adventurer's jaw dropped as he stared at that unbelievable phenomenon. While the hero kept teaching the adventurers how to strike those matches, one stunned explorer blurts out, "How on earth are you doing that?" Thrown into confusion by the chaos, the protagonist demanded why everyone was acting like they'd never seen it before. Then he offered to do it again, and the whole crowd gasped in shock. They couldn't believe their eyes. One smack of the stick on the paper and fire burst out like it was nothing, and everyone nearby started whispering, "Is this some kind of magic tool? We've never seen anything like this." The protagonist listened to every single one, then said, "All right, who's brave enough to try?" and shot back that it was simple and anyone could pull it off. And just like that, one person stepped forward, and everything fell into place exactly as the protagonist hoped. While he was roaming the market, he realized the city had never seen a single match. No one had even heard the word. So he bolted back to his own world the very next day and bought matches just so he could bring them here. While he plotted his move, an old man from the crowd burst out that he'd lived more than 250 years, and he'd never seen anything like it. The adventurer shot back, cheering, "Yeah, this is unreal." He said the flint and steel still lit a flame, but it took forever to get even a spark, and hauling their heavy magic gear around all the time was a pain too, yet the real killer was having no witches with them, which meant they'd be stuck wasting ages just trying to build a fire. The protagonist kicked off his brand new venture, and everyone nodded along. Then he grinned and declared they'd finally be done with those annoying, cash-draining auctions. He bragged that his invention, matches, would unleash freedom and pump up the excitement for everyone. He pumped the crowd to grab one each, and they all nodded along. Then an adventurer stepped up, stared at the match's mind-blowing craft, and demanded, "How much does it cost?" Finally, the protagonist snapped the question everyone had been dying to ask, and the crowd erupted into wild guesses. People were sure it had to cost a fortune, with one guy throwing out about 80 bronze coins as a reasonable price. Meanwhile, the protagonist did the math in his head and realized a single bronze coin was worth $100, $75 British pence, or 95 American cents. He had two ways to sell the matches: jack up the price and brand them as premium, or slash the cost and make the money back by moving way more of them. With the first method, every transaction would rake in more money, but fewer people could actually pay for it, so the pool of buyers would shrink fast. This time was a whole different beast from the first plan, where everyone could just buy the product, but the trade-off hit hard. Each item earned way less profit, so he had to pick just one method and commit. So he hauled himself back to the gatherers and blurted out the news. Every box had 40 matches inside. For the store's grand opening, they let everyone snag it for just 5 bronze coins, no more no less. Everyone cheered at the price and rushed to place their orders, until the protagonist barked a warning. If these matches got hit with water or humidity, they'd fail, so they'd better stay sharp. That day he sold more than 100 matches. When his shop was totally sold out, an old man shuffled up and asked for matches, so he apologized, admitted he had nothing, and promised, "Come back tomorrow, I'll give you my crew number." The old man looked lost, but the protagonist patiently explained what a crew number was, then shut the store for good. He muttered, "If this keeps up, even more people will pack in tomorrow." Later he stepped outside and froze. Clouds rolled in over the sky and worry hit him hard. Could he really juggle everything alone tomorrow? Then he pulled himself together and admitted, "Don't stress, everything will be fine," and made it clear he didn't need flowers tomorrow. On his way home, he spotted Aina stuck trying to sell her flowers, calling out that they were cheap and beautiful, but nobody even stopped to look. Out of nowhere, she clocked the protagonist and peppered him with, "How'd your day go?" He broke into a grin and said he sold every last match, so he shut his business down early. Ine gasped at just how wild it was, then he leaned in, asking about the flowers she'd grown herself. With teary eyes, she admitted they weren't moving, then snapped back, asking why her flowers wouldn't bring in buyers, and the protagonist immediately demanded to know what was wrong with her. She waved off his worry and swore she'd keep selling flowers no matter what. But right when she was about to walk out the door, he snatched her hands and begged, "Wait, please." He leaned in and asked her to give him just a moment of her time. He suggested she swing by his shop tomorrow, and she couldn't help but ask, "Are you really okay with me helping you?" The main character told her not to act like that because he needed her help, only because she was Aina, and then, of course, she'd get paid too. She burst out in a shout. She begged to work in his shop, swearing there was zero chance she wouldn't. On that note, he thanked her, and she waved it off fast. "Don't thank me, I'm terrible at selling." Then she dropped the truth: none of her flowers ever sold. That's why she had to grab the chance and thank him for handing her that job. He blurted to himself that he'd heard Aina thank him like that again and again, and it still hit him hard, so he thanked her in his head, told her he had to go full throttle at his store tomorrow, and swore he'd work his hardest. As the moment played out, the main character blurted to Aina that he'd be waiting for her the next morning, and she nodded right away. Then he sprinted back to the portal spot, terrified of getting caught. Hoping nobody was looking, he slipped through the door to his secret world and chanted, "Open sesame." Turns out the portal was hooked to his closet, and he could call it up anywhere just by thinking. So yeah, he prayed nobody would start cracking suggestive jokes. All right, time to head home. The second he stumbled into his room, he blurted out in disbelief that he finally had a whole pile of silver and copper coins. With his equivalent exchange skill, he flipped those coins into Japanese dollars. He couldn't believe how much profit he pulled in from his store in just 1 hour. It was nearly the same money as that dead-end job he used to hate. He blurted out that if things kept going this well, he might actually end up living the rest of his life as a merchant. So he snapped out of his idle fantasies and got ready to gear up for tomorrow at the store. He had to rush back to the last place he remembered where the matches were kept. Right then he finally saw them, and shock slammed him. Those matches were wind and water resistant. He had no clue stuff like that even existed, like he'd been totally blind not to notice them before. After snagging those matches, he couldn't hold back. He was sure he'd rake in a huge profit selling them to adventurers, and he was convinced the amount he grabbed would be more than enough. The shopkeeper blinked hard when he saw the guy buying an absurd pile of matches, wondering what kind of troublemaker he was dealing with. Once the man paid, the shopkeeper's mind snapped into action. He'd never even thought about how you haul that many matches home without getting burned. He started weighing his options and wondered if he could use his spatial storage skill, the so-called equivalent exchange, to pull it off. Against all odds, he used that skill and actually cracked open a pocket dimension. So he could stuff every last match into his bag and carry them without a single hassle. But his back was wrecked from his old job, so there was no way he could have hauled the same bag through this many matches. Suddenly, a glowing info bar blasted across his vision, showing he could now peek into the detailed stash inside his pocket dimension. And the power was getting scary strong. making him wonder how his grandmother ever pulled off something like this. With those abilities, he'd never have to carry a thing again, and it felt totally wrong. Then he doubled down and sold matches at the market for the next 4 days, because after that, he'd finally be free to choose what he wanted to do next. With his insane, extraordinary powers, he was convinced he'd rake in a fortune and become insanely wealthy. Out of nowhere, a girl caught him muttering to himself, and she hauled it straight to her mom, who snapped her out of it, telling her not to accuse strangers, because you never know what's going on in their head or what they've been through. So the girl took that advice, and the protagonist, panicking, zipped home fast to get ready for tomorrow. Next day, Yenna slipped into a bath, and her mom sent her off with a warm "have a nice day," then asked why she wasn't bringing her flowers, and Yenna shook her head no. After that, she told her mom she'd be helping the protagonist at his store today. Meanwhile, the protagonist was already itching to move. He stared at his grandmother's portrait, then begged her to send him luck. Then he yanked open the closet door and dove right into it. The second he hit the far side of the closet, Aina was right there, facing him. Then he said good morning and she shot one right back. He worried he'd kept her waiting, but she smiled and said she'd only just arrived a moment ago. Curious, the protagonist pressed her for the truth, and she finally admitted she'd waited a little longer than she planned, and that the customers were already inside. When he saw how many there were, he just stared in shock. Aina insisted they had to push their limits today, and the main character shot back, hold up, because he needed a moment to get everything set. Suddenly, the girl blurted out that the crowd was swallowing the whole street. People were even blocking other shops, and that sent a chill through him, because once upon a time he'd been a corporate slave, and he knew exactly how fast this could spiral into trouble. Then, just when it felt hopeless, a man popped out of nowhere and started praising the main character for pulling in so many people. He froze in shock when it hit him. Turns out that mysterious guy was the meat shop's own shopkeeper. The shopkeeper kept talking about rumors of a mysterious new match item, and the shock hit him when he realized it was the main character the whole time. Then the customer snapped, "What went wrong? You look swamped." And the main character just sighed, "It's not me, it's the crowd." The shopkeeper's lady had a plan. She pointed him to a stall on the edge of town and told him he could use it for free today, so he'd stop crowding the other vendors. She asked, "Are you really sure?" And she shot back, "Don't worry, this is our day off." And the main character thanked her with real appreciation. He spun toward the meat shop owner and demanded, "Is she your wife?" But she shook her head and told him, "No, she's my sister." Then they all rushed to the woman's shop to kick things off. The protagonist snapped again. S means the little one goes, B means the big one goes, then reminded Aina not to forget the survival matches they planned. Aina nodded, promising she had it covered, and he, still worried she might be too nervous, asked, "Are you really okay?" He apologized to his customers for the wait, then finally threw open the doors and officially opened his store. He told the priority ticket holders to rush up to the front, then pointed at Aina and demanded 3 small items and 2 big ones. After that, he hit her with another order, 5 small, 1 big, no excuses. Aina immediately bowed her head and apologized for the delay. And he demanded she rush over with 4 survival matches. Aina stared in disbelief as the matches vanished in seconds, sold out before she could even blink. One by one, the protagonist served every customer, and Aina just stood there, wide-eyed, stunned by how fast the sales were flying, like this trading gig had a secret thrill she'd never felt before. Suddenly, the main character blurted out to everyone that they sold out again. Anna snapped, "Are you serious?" And he confirmed they sold every last thing, then thanked Anna for all her help. They thanked the shop owner, and even their sister, who answered them with zero hesitation, and when the protagonist finally tallied the profit, they stared in disbelief. Yesterday, they thought they'd rake in $200,000 an hour. Then, after 3 straight hours of selling matches, they somehow pulled in about $1.5 million. That's nearly $490,000 every hour. They stared at the numbers like, so this is what millionaires rake in. Then they hustled on fast, before anyone could come up with bright ideas. They couldn't use their pocket dimension. It was a terrible move in front of everyone, so they ditched that plan, snapped back to reality, and the protagonist immediately paid Aina for busting her tail. He told her to go pick out something beautiful for herself, and to do the same for her mom too. Aina thanked him, but then insisted she should be the one thanking him for letting her work, only for the protagonist to shrug it off and say she was the one who helped him. Even with everything going on, Anna still refused to let the moment pass without thanking them. Suddenly, her stomach rumbled like thunder, and she realized they hadn't even taken a breather all day, so why not go grab a quick bite right now? He handed her some food and she immediately asked, "Is that bread?" He grinned and corrected her, "No, it's a sandwich." Then she froze, shocked because this bright, white bread was her first time ever seeing it. She took one bite and blurted, "This is insanely good," and the protagonist's face lit up because she was genuinely loving that sandwich. While they were both digging into their food, another girl slid into the scene and asked, straight up, for a minute of his time. She said she'd heard there were new matches for sale in town, and she figured he was the one selling them. Then he snapped, "Yeah," and immediately apologized because he was sold out for the day. The girl tried to clear the air and explained she wasn't there to buy matches at all. But instead of walking away, she craved one thing: she had to see him. She barged right in and called herself Karen, the mayor of this town. The protagonist was completely stunned. He couldn't wrap his head around how the mayor was such a gorgeous, insanely attractive young girl. He'd been sure the mayor would be a heavyweight, built on power, backed by authority, and running the whole city. He shoved his thoughts aside and demanded to know what Karen wanted from him. Then she smiled and poured out her gratitude, thanking him from the bottom of her heart for a merchant as top tier as him choosing her town. He cut her off and demanded that he be the one to thank her for letting him do business there. She shot back that he clearly had low self-esteem, like most stubborn merchants in that town, and the protagonist just asked, "So, is that true?" She snapped that question and demanded, "Will you help me?" She explained how the town sat out in the middle of nowhere, where every merchant acted like they were dragging a curse through their own shop, and the essentials were priced sky-high, so their low prices didn't even match reality, and their money just kept getting worse. It was a full-on mess that demanded someone step in and fix it. She said she was done being stuck in that town and that they had to smash through it, starting with a market. Then she pressed a key into his hand and swore it was the one that opened her house. She froze at what he said, then shot back, "Are you okay?" But Aina burst in, shaking the room. "The mayor wants to move in with you." She acted like that was exactly what the mayor demanded, then dropped the bomb that she wanted him to marry him. The protagonist froze, then blurted, "Wait, what do you mean by that?" The mayor shot back fast, insisting it was just a misunderstanding, then made it crystal clear she's single, not hunting for a marriage candidate, and that definitely wasn't what she had in mind. She snapped the talk back to the point, then leaned in and told him she needed a favor. She told him there was an empty house just up the way and handed him the key, then said that starting tomorrow he could run his business out of the shop on the first floor. Curious, the girl pressed for answers and she snapped back, "Yesterday, other merchants came to me with complaints. People kept jamming the middle of the market, so nobody could sell a thing." The mayor leaned in and asked if he'd spotted the same problem. He nodded hard, agreeing it was nearly impossible to keep running business like that. The mayor stepped up, promised to personally show him around, and basically said, "Check it out. If you like it, you'll know." They burst into the empty building, and the protagonist froze, not knowing his next move, because this place was unreal. The mayor leaned in and said she was praying he'd love it. Ine leaned in close and whispered in his ear, hinting the mayor didn't just want answers. She said the man might be trying to figure out whether he had a lover. Without even thinking, he blurted out that he didn't have a girlfriend. Then the mayor instantly shrieked that that wasn't what she was trying to ask. She pressed him, asking why a successful merchant would ever risk his business in some tiny town. With only about 500 people. Yeah, that's a brutal number for a mayor to admit, but she shot back that he could rake in more money in other towns and cities, and the protagonist immediately nodded along, conceding she was right. But honestly, he loved the place, so much that he even said he'd only been in Ninrich for 3 days. But Ina, his right hand, poured her heart into the job, and the mayor even treated him kindly, even though he wasn't from around there. It was like he'd fallen head over heels for the whole town. The protagonist, ripped out of another world, didn't know a thing about other towns, but one thing hit him hard: nothing else felt this warm. The mayor lit up and thanked him for pouring his heart into her town, and the protagonist watched her feelings ripple across her face. He finally clocked it: he'd pushed a girl to tears. Later, the mayor offered her hand and told him he could reach out to her anytime, so he fired back, saying she should call him Cheryl. Once the hellos were out of the way, the protagonist signed a 1-month deal to run a store at the town hall, and kicked off his business the moment the papers were done. 5 days later, the protagonist groaned in regret. Turns out they'd burned through every last match for the day. He figured he'd sold enough matches to cover the town's demand, so it blew his mind that they kept selling out anyway. Right then, Ine popped in and told him she was finally done cleaning, and he waved her off with a good night. He told her to crash on the second floor, and when she offered to help more, he shut it down fast. "I'm good, everything's fine." After a while, he shouted for Aina, but she never showed up. He figured she must have nodded off. She was only 8, after all. As he closed in, she snapped awake, and he blurted out whether he'd woken her. She giggled that it was Daddy's fault she was still asleep, and that she'd been talking in her sleep. She told him to pick her up, straight up mistaking him for her dad. Then he sank into his dad's arms and dropped off into a deep sleep again. Then she tucked him into bed, and he murmured to himself that, somehow, he'd become a father too. On the store's fourth day of sales, the main character decided Ayana needed a breather, so he strode up to the crowd and shouted, "We're sold out." Working alone was brutal. Then the mayor suddenly showed up, called Shuru by name, and that one moment hit her with pure gratitude. She told him that if he said yes, the guild would be rolling into the capital soon. They'd figure out whether to set up a whole new branch right there. She demanded the main character show off his matches to the folks pouring in from the capital, and he didn't refuse, though he couldn't shake the question of what it was all for. The mayor smiled and said she'd never seen anything like it, not even back in the capital or anywhere else. Curious as hell, she demanded to know where he even pulled those things from. Watching the main character hesitate, she snapped that she was trying to pry it loose now, and if only he could pull it off, she figured the inspectors would eat that up. The main character swore he understood her, and she basically said, "Use the matches to reel in the inspector. Then he'll believe that her talent has those rare, special items with a magic-like charm, and that's how they pull off the win." The protagonist blurted that he'd come up with something surprising too, something that would blow her away on top of the matches. The mayor flashed him a grateful smile and swore he'd pay him back someday. The very next afternoon, the matches sold out again, every seat grabbed, just like before. Back at work, Aga cornered the protagonist and asked what was wrong, and he admitted he was hunting for something that would grab the inspector's attention. Then boom, he blurted that he'd decided to swing by Karen's place for a little while. When he finally made it to her place, he blurted that the matches were sold out again, only to hear the mayor gush that he was a master merchant, which totally crushed what the protagonist was trying to understand. Then the real shock hit. Why were they moving 5 times the matches compared to the whole town's population? The mayor dropped a bombshell rumor. Someone was reselling matches in another town, and when it turned into a hit, word sprinted everywhere, and people started copying the hustle. So maybe they should slap a limit on matches. Plus, she told him she was already at his store, ready to beg for a huge favor. They hauled themselves upstairs, in the office to talk it out, before he even got the chance to grill her about that request. She leaned in and asked if he knew the Adventurers Guild in town, and he shot back, "It's called Silver Moon," while the mayor never even realized he'd already guessed the name. The mayor told him the guild was packed with adventurers as customers, and the Adventurers Guild served as the go-between. They took orders from clients and handed them off to adventurers in an organization that paid out for every job done, whether it was shielding livestock and townsfolk from monster attacks or scavenging herbs and mushrooms to make medicine. The mayor said if we knew this sooner, we'd move now, no time to waste, and then she hit me with the real kicker. Silver Moon was the only adventurers guild in town. The moment she mentioned the guildmaster of Silver Moon, the protagonist's head spun, because that guildmaster wasn't just some name, she was the leader of the Adventurers Guild, a title that made every teenage boy's eyes light up. Then the protagonist leaned in and demanded, "What the heck is wrong with Gilmus?" Karen blurted out that he'd fled the night before because he couldn't afford to keep the guild running. The guild adventurers were gearing up to blow town, and the reason hit hard. The guild had no money for proper management. Still, she refused to back down and swore she had a plan. The Adventurers Guild in the capital set their sights on planting a brand new branch in their town. She turned down the offer so far, thinking of Silver Moon, but with everything unraveling, she finally started to seriously consider saying yes, and the protagonist cut in fast, warning them they were moments from losing a major asset, so yeah, accepting it was the right call. The mayor stepped right up to the protagonist and grilled him, asking if he was truly sure he wanted to tag along with the adventurers on their quests. He shot back that this was the only way he could really grasp what adventurers were fighting for. She demanded to know if he understood the risks, because back then the Eastern Forest was the only place adventurers could even go. He swore he had it handled, but really he wanted adventurers to haul herbs and minerals from that place. She said it'd make things safer, then teased that she still wanted to drag him into some adventure, before admitting, straight-faced, that her bond with Silver Moon was an absolute disaster. Last night, the substitute guildmaster from Silver Moon burst into town like a storm. He burst in and demanded she lend them some money. It was a simple request, so the other protagonist leaned in and asked, "How much do we need?" And she answered by holding up both hands, showing him exactly 10. He asked, "Is it 10 copper?" And she snapped no. Then he tried, "What about 10 silver?" And she shut that down too, still refusing. When he blinked, she leaned in and asked if they wanted 10 gold, and the mayor whipped his hand over his mouth, hissing that he was way too loud. She snapped back that in a town this small, there wasn't even close to that kind of money to spare. Maybe a tenth could have tempted her, but a full 10 gold coins. Then the main character blurted out that it would be brutal to beg for help after they'd already refused their request. The mayor gave a quick nod and promised she'd send the letter, but the main character had no right to expect a single thing back. Then the main character pushed straight into the Silver Moon Adventurers Guild in the east end of town. This was their very first trip to a guild, so nerves were buzzing in their chest. The moment he stepped into the guild, the other adventurers came up to greet him with wide grins and loud cheers. One of them blurted out that a new member had joined and demanded, "Where's the welcome for the seniors?" And the main character shot back that he wasn't some fresh adventurer at all, he was a merchant. The adventurer finally snapped and admitted it was their fault, mixing them up for an animal cabadon, and then they added that they should have charged for a punch that could crush stone. Out of nowhere, a voice ripped through the air, and the protagonist had no choice but to chase down where it came from. He spotted someone sitting there, slid up to her, and told her he'd come straight on the mayor's referral. He leaned in to talk, telling her he only needed a tiny slice of her time. Startled out of sleep, the woman shot upright and demanded to know how long he'd been standing there. She realized she was wearing a school uniform, and panic hit her like a punch, rage flaring as she snapped, "Why are you touching me? Do you even like me?" With a single word, she crowned herself the poster girl of the Silver Moon and bragged that she could summon 1,000 hard-bodied men. The protagonist shot back, saying there was nobody else around, and it came off as downright rude. She said, all bold confidence, that sometimes others showed up too, but honestly she alone would be enough to beat him and smash stone with sheer force, and then the protagonist realized she was about to be a total nightmare. He didn't waste another second. He cut straight to the point and demanded where he could find the substitute guildmaster, then told her to call them for him. She told him she could call in the substitute, and then blew his mind, because she wasn't just summoning one, she was the substitute guildmaster. It was simple YA meal. Yes, that girl got picked as the substitute guildmaster of the Silver Moon Guild. The guildmaster fled the very next day, and that was the last anyone ever saw of another young girl, who simply disappeared for reasons nobody could explain. The girl was convinced those jerks were sneaking around with an affair, totally clueless that she knew every last detail, because they were making out all over the place right under her nose. By the time it was over, they were yapping and banging their way through the guildmaster's room. She even prayed bandits would snatch them, strip them down, beat them up, and dump them on a slave merchant for some pathetic 5 copper, or close to it. She blurted out that the guildmaster smelled like a horny goblin, and then the protagonist cut in, saying she'd done her best. "Are you done venting yet?" She laughed at how sweet he was to sit through her grumbling for 5 whole hours. Then she started unbuttoning her shirt, and he demanded to know why. The girl shot him a question, "Why are you here?" And he thrust a letter into her hands from the mayor, and when she heard that name, everything changed. She snapped with rage, calling her the stupid big-breast mayor, and with fury blazing on his face, he couldn't help wondering if Grandma's ring had gone haywire. The protagonist told her, "I have no clue who you're talking about," then made it crystal clear he meant the mayor of Monarch Karen. She shot back that all the nutrition must have gone straight to her breast, and then Karen, the cruelest woman alive, snatched the letter from the protagonist and tore it to shreds. She felt deep in her bones that affairs and adultery were downright disgusting. Then Akin showed her true colors. She ditched Silver Moon, welcomed a whole new adventure guild, and left no doubt she was rotten to the core. She wouldn't budge, not even for a measly 10 coins, despite the protagonist insisting that it was a huge sum, basically worth 10 gold coins. Karen had her own worries, so she snapped in and demanded to know, did he actually have feelings for her, or was he just way too invested? She even admitted she was still living with her, convinced they were still best friends. The protagonist snapped that she had no right to insult people, especially her closest friends, just because they weren't rolling in money. The guild was in deep trouble because she had no idea what to do next. The protagonist then leaned in and spilled what he knew about her ties to the mayor, demanding she drop the whole letter mess. And right then, he revealed he'd picked up a commission for the Silver Moon Adventurers Guild. She leaned in and asked, "Tell me, what can I do to help?" He was thinking she might want to tag along with an adventurer. If that was it, she'd just send an escort request, except she said there wasn't really any precedent for that. Then the protagonist asked if it was hard to pull off, and she admitted she could only think of one qualified person. It was a top-tier party of 4 powerhouses, and that kind of lineup doesn't come cheap. The price skyrocketed. She leaned in and revealed the party's name, Azure Flash. After he wrapped up his chat with the substitute guildmaster, the protagonist hauled back to his store, flipped the sign to closed, and Ine immediately asked, you're really shutting down." He smirked and said he'd figured it'd only be around 3 days, because he wanted to pretend to be an adventurer for a while. Ine had her own dreams to chase, so when the pressure eased, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. She asked what he wanted to do, and he shrugged it off, saying none of it mattered. Then they finally said their goodbyes. At the Silver Moon Adventurers Guild, he slammed his knuckles on the door like he meant it. The substitute guildmaster showed up, opened the door for him, and told him she'd been waiting on him this whole time. She leaned in and promised she wouldn't devour him. No monsters, no tricks, nothing like that. Then he wasted no time. Right on the spot, he introduced him to Silver Moon's pride. A silver-ranked party was ready to ride with him on his mission, hunting down high-class herbs. Right as she was about to spill everything about their leader to him, he burst onto the scene and yelled that it had been ages since he'd last seen the protagonist, but the protagonist couldn't for the life of him remember where he'd met their leader before. Then it snapped into place. This leader was the first customer who'd ever bought matches from him, and when he finally introduced himself, he called himself a liar and swore he'd bring the rest of the party in one by one. He introduced everyone, even their priest, Rolf, who lit up at meeting Shiro and insisted they'd be a perfect team. The leader leaned in and warned the protagonist, "Don't you dare piss off the war priest. He's notorious for swinging that mace like it's his favorite hobby." Then they finally got their magician, Neska. She barely talked, but when she did, her magic was unstoppable. Her chanting dragged a little too long, so in pure frustration the magician swung her stick and smacked the leader on the head, barking at him to stay out of her business. The leader blurted, "If you chant faster, I'll do it," and she shot back, "Maybe, I'll think about it," just as he was getting ready to bring in the next member. She barged in, cut everyone off, and boldly introduced herself, Keela. When he saw her with those cat ears, joy hit him fast, and he immediately wondered if she came from the cat race, until she frowned at his reaction and snapped that there are tons of awful people out there who hate the cat race. Between their commissioners, the boy basically demanded, "Who in their right mind hates cat ears? This race is adorable." The girl blushed hard, but the leader brushed her off and introduced her as the ranger, then said she scouts and hunts traps, and she chimed right in that she can back it up with a dagger and a bow. She stared at him like he was nothing, and told him he hadn't seen a single thing yet. Then the leader sneered that her specialty was always running off, and the protagonist snapped back that he better not talk like that after their quick meet. The main character erupted, screaming for everyone to get out right now. And the leader leaned in, asking if they were truly ready and locked in. Then the main character shot back, "We're set, we're going." But in the end, they chose to charge straight for the eastern forest. Meanwhile, Aina barged into the lab after knocking, and found a man already waiting for her inside. As the action hit its peak, a brand new quest kicked off, warrior monk Rolf, wizard Neska, and ranger Keela, ready to dive into whatever came next. And the warrior Liar, the main character, could only pray the crew wouldn't stumble into trouble. The leader snapped at everyone to chill for now, and do their best to steer clear of the monsters. Maybe they were out there, but finding them wouldn't be simple. The cat girl chirped that she'd already stumbled on a huge stash of herbs, yet the priest snapped that they weren't hunting the usual stuff. They needed the pricey, high-class herbs, the ones that would make the guild approve their request, but yeah, those weren't going to be easy to track down. The magician nodded right along with the priest, and Liar blurted, "It won't be long before darkness falls." Once Liar figured out what was going on, he called it and told them to stop for the day. Then the leader demanded to know if they really had the leeway to rest up, since that old rule was never allowed to bend. The protagonist blurted to himself that he wanted his new boss to say the same words as the old one. Then, out of nowhere, the leader snapped, "Set up camp." And somehow he even swallowed the truth that those matches were absolutely awesome. While everyone bowed their heads in gratitude and praised Shiro, he stepped forward and thanked them too, until the leader sneered and asked, dead serious, if Shiro really could make a killing by selling them in the royal capital. When the priest admitted that the moment that notorious merchant association in the capital heard about it, trouble would come for him, Liar jumped in and swore the priest was never wrong. The magician girl snapped at the liar that she was starving after walking all day, and the leader immediately shouted for everyone to find something to eat. Kairat caught himself thinking that even seasoned adventurers, who spent most of their days in the wild, survived on nothing fancy, just dried meat and that tough, hard-looking bread. Kellen noticed Shiro drifting off in his thoughts, asked why he hadn't eaten, and even offered him a chunk of raw fish, yet Shiro politely turned it down. Then he smiled and said he'd brought some. Right after that, he yanked out every last ready-to-eat food can like a prize stash. He pulled out these insane, state-of-the-art containers, and the whole room just stared, because nobody had a clue what on earth he was doing. The leader snapped that it couldn't possibly be the food, then dared Shiro to finish it all alone. Shiro grinned and said there was plenty for everyone, and revealed those weren't leftovers at all but fresh new items for his store, hoping they'd all taste up and give him their honest feedback. The second the protagonist announced a food sampling party, everyone erupted with joy. After one bite, the leader's eyes widened and he blurted, "What is this?" Kella nodded along, gushing, "It's so good." Even the priest had to admit he couldn't resist it either. The shock food sampling party wrapped up fast. Every single one of the four gave glowing praise. Kella blurted that she was stuffed now, and the magician confessed she'd never forget how delicious that chocolate tasted, while the priest was convinced it could only be God's plan. That night, Lyre spotted the hero sitting alone, marched up to him, and ordered him to sleep, because the watch still needed them. The protagonist admitted he wasn't used to hitting the sheets that early, and the leader shot back, "Then talk with me," before the protagonist fired off, "Adventurers don't sleep in sleeping bags." The Lyre leaned in and warned him that winter was brutal enough to freeze them to death with only one blanket, and if they grabbed more, it would just jack up their luggage. The Lyre suddenly blurted a wish that he actually had his spatial storage skill, and that hit the protagonist like a truck, because he hadn't even realized the Lyre knew about it too. Then the Lyre asked straight up if he was a merchant, as if that alone proved he'd heard of it, and when the value was brought up, they tossed out a range of 1,000 to 100,000 for just how much that skill was worth. They also spilled that some dungeons and ancient civilizations hid a spatial storage skill book, and yep, the protagonist had that very book. So he cornered the Lyre and demanded, "What's this worth?" The Lyre blinked in confusion, because he was a merchant too and couldn't understand why the guy was still asking. Then he figured it might be big enough to haul a horse cart, and maybe even pay for a no-balls mansion. The Lyre blurted that it was probably worth more than he could stuff in a whole lifetime, and the protagonist breathed to himself that he was glad he'd kept it under wraps, because he'd see just how much it could hold later. Then he told the Lyre he was finally getting sleepy, and the leader promised, "Don't worry, I'll wake you up in the morning." Out of nowhere, he shot up off the ground and snapped into fighting stance like he expected trouble to strike any second. He busted into the room, shouting for everyone to wake up, then grabbed Shiro and begged, "Can you wake Neska too?" A chilling presence crept closer, inching toward them. When the protagonist was told to wake Neska, he stormed to her side and begged her to snap out of her chocolate dreams, because it felt like an emergency was already exploding. Then he leaned in and grilled Keela, asking if she knew anything about it. And she told him plain as day that it was a dead end, because whatever was coming seemed to be drifting downwind, and she couldn't smell a thing. Right then, the priest snapped that they might be facing a monster far smarter than they ever expected. The leader snapped, telling Neska to rush and get her magic ready, now. Suddenly it clicked. There, out of nowhere, was the last thing they expected, a grizzly. The leader blared that something was closing in, then smugly reminded them that with silver rank badges, they'd never beat it, so he wanted to bolt right then, but couldn't, while the priest snapped that Kella, the only catch race member, was the one who could slip away. Keela pushed back, yelling that she wouldn't abandon them, but their leader snapped back that no matter how hard they fought, winning was impossible. So yeah, they had zero clue what to do next, until the priest snapped that someone would have to be the bait for those coming auctions. They were all stuck on one burning question: who was the best candidate? Option A, Wright, the protagonist. Option B, Sheru, who had just met Azure Flash today. Option C, him, the lone adventurer who felt like a complete stranger, and in the end, the choice was the protagonist himself. No matter how long they wrestled with it. Right on cue, the leader arrived and called Kairat, just like the protagonist had guessed. The second he saw their chalk-pale faces, he knew the message wasn't fear, it was death. As expected, the protagonist immediately figured Lyre would hit him with the truth, that he'd been dragged in as bait so the rest could stay safe. To his shock, it was all the opposite. Lyre told him to flee with Kella and Neska, then promised Ralph and him would hold the monster off. That left Kairat completely baffled, because the leader straight up told him, "Me and Ralph have been friends forever, so you don't have to worry about a thing." But instead of bolting, Neska snapped that she'd fight too, while Lyre shot back that she was just dead weight, dragging them down. Still, Lyre pushed back, swearing he had to look cool in front of the woman he loved. In the end, he yanked Ralph close to summon healing magic, and begged that it wouldn't take him out with one blow. Ralph nodded fast, then got one last warning. Once he went all in, bolt immediately. Keela snapped a warning to Lyre, because a monster was creeping up behind his back. And they both froze, because somehow there weren't just one of them, there were two. Ralph ordered Keela and Neska to get ready to sprint, while he and Lyre snapped into defense to keep the monsters off them. Then Neska blurted, "We're dead for sure." Then the protagonist clung to his grandma's words, "Never give up, not matter how hopeless the situation looked." With a deep breath, he charged straight at the monsters, and even the crowd gasped. Then he tore into them using fire. And then he snapped his focus to the next monster, taunting it like, "All right, your turn. Time to feel the heat." The protagonist realized two monsters were tearing through the area at the exact same time, yet he, his companions, and the other adventurers refused to back down. They were charging straight into the fight. The leader's face twisted in confusion when he saw the protagonist fighting instead of sprinting like he was told. He snapped him over and grilled him about why he wouldn't obey orders, but the protagonist straight up ignored him. He went for a firecracker to throw the monsters off before slipping away, and when his friends grilled him about it, he grinned and said that Grizzly was going to regret crossing him. Then he lit firecrackers to whip the Grizzly into even more chaos. Right then the leader barked, "Someone's creeping up on me," just as the grizzly bear charged in to strike. Cher whipped around and blasted a shot straight at its face, and it stumbled back in retreat. The protagonist swore that move was insanely strong, then couldn't help wondering, was that a critical hit? The leader frowned, scratching his head, and demanded to know if Shiro pulled real magic or some sneaky trick. Shiro just shrugged it off, an item loaded with poisonous mist, then he aimed and sprayed it like a weapon. Liar was still totally baffled, couldn't wrap his head around it, but he shoved his doubts aside and shouted for everyone to run, right now, because the mist was already frying their eyes and clogging their noses. He told them they couldn't just let this chance vanish, and Keela nodded instantly, then yanked out a bag of huge nails, itching to get revenge on that monster. It was brutal work, but somehow they pulled it off and finally slayed that creature. Liar snapped that they just had to dismantle it, but Nesca balked and said it was too much trouble, so the protagonist pushed Liar to think it over, because he liked Nesca, and then Nesca's cheeks flared red, and Liar instantly felt his own embarrassment hit too. He blurted out that he had zero clue what the protagonist was talking about. Shiro blurted out that he'd already told the girl he loved about something, right before the interruption hit, and the leader snapped at him to focus on cutting up the bear, because Grizzly's parts were gold. That's why Lar ordered him to rip off its skin, Nesca to drain the blood into a leather bag and freeze it with magic, and Kella to handle the fangs. Now they were mid-high-class dismantling, skin peeled back and everything moving fast. Next came the claws, and then Keela blurted, completely out of nowhere, "So what do I do with its balls?" And everyone just stood there stunned. The leader claimed the testicles had medicinal value, so he demanded they cut those off too. Then later, Liar admitted they'd reached the limit and couldn't carry any more than that. He even asked the protagonist to pause the quest and head back to town. He pushed to sell the bear's loot before it spoiled, because that stuff was worth way more than the fancy herbs, and he even claimed half of that guy's cup was his. The protagonist just stared and asked, "Isn't that way too much?" The leader snapped back, "Yes," like it was the only answer that mattered, because they'd been wiped out completely without that thing of his, and we started grilling them on what it was even worth. The main character smiled kindly at the liar, told him not to stress, and said he truly believed human life is priceless. Out of nowhere, Kella burst in, looked Shiro dead in the eye, and declared, "You're a good man," then confessed she loved him. Even the magician nodded along, and Ralph snapped that if every merchant on Earth was as good as Shiro, the world would instantly become a better place. The main character thanked everyone with all his heart, then snapped his gaze onto the liar and said he finally understood why they were desperate to get back to town. He offered to haul all the dismantled pieces for every single one of them. The liar shot him a grin of thanks, then right when he tried to keep talking, it all cut off. So he snapped into action with his inventory skill and stuffed everything away, and everyone went wide-eyed when Shiro pulled off that kind of magic. Then he finally bowed his head and apologized for not warning them about it. But the leader leaned in and told him, "Don't apologize, you just saved our lives." The main character turned around and headed back to the town, putting one foot forward like the adventure wasn't done yet. The leader cut him off and demanded, "Are you packing those bears with spatial storage?" And just like that, it was crystal clear, they had to keep hunting for high-class herbs. For the next 2 days, his wild adventure kept blazing forward without stopping. When he finally hauled his findings back into town, Ina's face lit up. She practically threw her arms around him and welcomed him in with pure joy. The leader clocked what was going on and fired off a question. Was she his daughter? He scrambled to explain, saying Aina had actually helped him out at the store. Then he introduced himself to her, handed over the store key, and told Aina to wait right there. After that, they tore over to the Silver Moon to lock in the quest for good. When they came back, they froze. There she was, the substitute guild master on her knees, begging for more time to repay someone's money. He thought this was exactly how it was supposed to play out. Then his world flipped when he saw her on her knees, begging that man. Rage hit him hard as he snapped that for 6 straight months she kept promising, I'll pay you back next time, and this time he drew a line. No way was he letting it slide. She shot back that she'd somehow pull the money together by next month. Shiro demanded to know who the guy really was, and the leader shrugged and said he had to be some kind of materials merchant. The protagonist rushed right up to the guy and introduced himself as a merchant who handled business in town, demanding to hear the whole story, and the guy immediately snapped that he was a materials merchant named Gerald. Gerald, an old buddy of Guildmaster Blotto, vanished out of nowhere, like he'd fled the moment the guild hit hard times and ran low on cash, and to help him out, Gerald got 10 gold coins from Blotto, with the guild building staked as collateral. He even slammed a contract down in front of the guildmaster and yelled like he meant war. They warned him if he didn't cough up the money, that guild building would be Gerald's the moment the deal went through, with the land and building value barely scraping together enough to cover the debt, even if he sold everything. Gerald then ordered Emil to grab the certificate for the building. But she refused. Gerald pressed her for the reason behind her loyalty to Blotto, the one who ditched her, and he told her to face the truth, let go of that dead-end guild. She shot back that this wasn't about loyalty at all. This was the one place where, as a beast man, she finally found belonging after the world had mocked her. This place held happy memories and painful ones, but the good ones crowded out the bad, and that's why it mattered so much to her. She couldn't bear to lose it. It was a place packed with memories that hit you like a wave the second you stepped inside. If Shiro remembered right, it was 5 years ago, back in the summer, when his mother burst in and dropped the bomb. His grandmother had vanished for 2 whole years. They planned to sell her house because he kept forgetting every last detail, but the moment he heard those words again, his mind snapped back. He immediately dropped to his knees and begged like his life was on the line, pleading with them not to sell the house because it was packed with her precious memories. Sure, it was humiliating to beg in front of all those relatives, but he couldn't stop himself. Then the merchant snapped, saying he totally got it if it was for personal reasons, and he made it clear there was a contract on the table, one he insisted he already knew about. Emil abruptly leaned in and asked if the protagonist could buy the whole guild for her. The merchant's eyes locked onto that dismantled bear the adventurers dragged in, and he couldn't process what he was seeing, until he leaned in and confirmed the parts weren't just any grisly scraps, they were unisubspecies material. He asked the protagonist if he could buy them, but the protagonist shut it down fast, saying they were for Silver Moon. Then the guildmaster cut in, claiming the guild couldn't foot the bill, and the protagonist just smiled, telling her to pay anytime. The leader told the merchant he could buy from them the same way the protagonist did, and the deal was set. He just wouldn't have to pay until later. So the merchant bargained with the mill to buy everything for 32 gold, but Emil shot back with 36. After they wiped out the guild debt of 10 gold, it dropped to 26. Then the merchant threw in 2 extra gold for the Grizzlies' balls, and boom, the final total came to 28 gold coins. The merchant stormed out, promising he'd bring even better deals next time. That twist hit the guildmaster like a lightning bolt. He suddenly wanted Silver Moon to keep living. Emil thanked them all, and the leader snapped. No, you thank Kairat. This is just what adventurers do without even thinking. Liar told her to handle the final request, but she snapped back that she needed to talk right now, because Kairat was standing right there. The protagonist asked to stay, and she shut him down fast. His work was finished. Then she pointed him out the door and turned straight back to Liar. He demanded to know how he'd handle a bodyguard request when the target wouldn't be there, then grilled her about whether his safety was locked in, because he figured she might try to cut the rewards again. She snapped back that there was absolutely no way she'd pull that stunt. So the leader demanded she cough up 30 silver coins, and the protagonist opened her mouth to ask something. Then Liar cut in fast, saying it wasn't the moment to bargain. Then Liar blurted that he'd already paid 30 gold coins, so were the last 70 silver pieces just the guild's handling fee, or was someone getting played? Right as Emil went to bolt, the leader snatched her from behind and barked for a full explanation, while the magician fumed and threatened to burn that rabbit to ash. Keela didn't hold back. She snapped that they'd never forgive her this time. He couldn't help but feel relieved he didn't bring Aina, because deep down, he knew exactly how he really felt. He came back from the guild, and while Aina scrubbed the stairs, she turned to him with bright eyes and peppered him with questions about how his adventure went. They were deep in the forest, and he couldn't hold back. He spilled every detail to her. He broke down everything that happened over the last 3 days, and you could feel the brutal intensity in every word. Aina stared, stunned by his savage victory over that gruesome foe, then shouted praises for him. He humbly gave all the credit to the Azure Flash, but right when they were talking, boom, someone knocked on the store door. The protagonist swung it open, and there was Karen, pounding the door with frantic, desperate knocks. She clung to him with all her strength, terrified he might be hurt. He told her he was totally fine, thanks to the azure flash, and Karen let out a huge breath of relief, then practically begged him to tell her everything. Did he learn anything while he traveled with those adventurers? He told me he'd learned a ton, then straight up asked if he could stock up on his brand new products in time for that upcoming inspection. Karen, like she'd already clocked his mad storage skill, teased him with a playful grin. He tried to shut it down, but Karen's instincts hit the mark. He confessed he had that storage skill, and admitted a woman's intuition hits even harder than magic. Karen admitted she'd baited him on purpose as part of her bargaining practice. The mayor crashed the conversation with a grin, saying hagglers never get stopped by the truth. Then the protagonist snapped to it, realizing he'd been played, and vowed to keep a tighter guard from here on out. When they finally got back to his products, he pulled out his brand new items and showed them off. Anna and Karen's eyes went wide with fascination. But the mayor couldn't wrap his head around the fact that something like that could even exist. Right then, the leader of the adventurers barged into the store and demanded to know what they were selling. The main character told him that Aina had already set up the displays just for him. After that wild grizzly bear mess, it all came out. The two of them started dating right after. Liar grilled him about whether a big-name guild was really rolling into town, and the main character nodded, making the adventurers all pray it was the legit kind of guild. And Kairat grilled the rumor mill, hunting down guilds with the worst reputations. Aina dropped a chilling name drop. She talked about the Devil's Trident and the Fang of the Venom Dragon. But he called out the worst Aina-informed churro of the bunch, then noticed the inspector guys never showed, so he started wondering if they were lost, even though they had a straight shot from the next town. Karen had been posted at the town entrance since yesterday, vibrating with anticipation for them to finally show up. Finally, the bell ripped through the air, evening was here, and the main character told Ina, you can call it a day, because she'd crushed her work. But it was a bit too soon, so he shut the shop anyway, only for the main character to step out when the lady caught him and asked if she could check a few of his items. He nodded along, and she pressed him. Are these really the rumored items everyone's been whispering about in the city? She volunteered to show him, and the moment she did, he was blown away. Then she pointed at the silver piece and asked what it was, and he lit up as he explained it was a space bracelet meant to keep you warm. She took the leap and tried it on. No one expected it, but it worked insanely well. After she asked about the bottle, she flashed him a grateful smile, thanked him for clearing it up, and then bolted out fast. A few days later, Anna yanked the main character's attention as she told him the inspector had finally rolled into town. Karen had been sitting on pins and needles, then her hopes crashed when she found out the plan had changed. The mayor slipped Aina a mission, get Kairat to Silver Moon, because the inspector was calling for an unplanned meeting. Inside the room, the main character snapped a greeting to Shiru, and the mayor proudly called him the city's top merchant. Then little Aina chimed in too, greeting him just as cheerfully. Gabus, the inspector, stared at Aina like she was the whole workplace, and the main character clocked it instantly. Gabus looked brand new at this. Gabus started trashing the guild building, sneering at how dirty it was and spitting vile insults about subhumans. The mayor brushed off his comments and kept his eyes locked on Kairu's sails. Gabus peered at the rumored match cradled in Shiru's hand and gave a sharp nod. Yeah, that one was pure quality. He declared that the Labyrinth Marauders were about to open a brand new branch right here in town. But only they would get the right to be the sole guild allowed. He looked at Silver Moon like it was nothing but a tiny, useless guild, then boldly said they didn't need it at all, like they'd crush it on the spot. And right after that, he demanded the whole branch get 0 taxes, because out here, they couldn't possibly turn a profit unless he made it free. Lastly, he demanded the exclusive right to buy and sell those matches himself. The main character froze at what he was hearing, and Gabus snapped that the guy must be slow on the uptake, then demanded, so you're really a merchant. Right after that, Gabus closed in on the protagonist and declared he was buying every last match of his. Then, the second he lunged, the mayor swooped in and demanded, what do you want? Because she was still in the middle of talking with that newbie. The mayor praised Gabus for bringing growth to the town, then slammed him for going too far. Handing him a monopoly on the matches was overkill. Gabus fired back like, sure, a countryside mayor like you wouldn't get it unless I break it down for you. He told her straight up that the border town could only sell so much, then leaned in and asked, so what do you think happens when a guild across the whole country swallows the entire stock? We're talking profits so wild they'll blow your mind. The protagonist admitted the offer sounded awesome, but then he cut it off because he couldn't stock unlimited matches. Even the mayor refused his apology, then snapped that if those were his demands, she wanted to wipe the slate clean and start the negotiations all over. Gabus seethed, furious that he'd even bothered trekking all the way to this lousy town, only to find weak, useless adventurers waiting there. Then the main character cut in, told him to hang on, and said the eastern forest was packed with rare monsters, herbs, and metals. So Gabus asked if that was enough to kick off his own branch, especially since adventurers were already using this town as their home base. He just burst into laughter, sneering that it was a pathetic excuse for adventurers who couldn't hack it in the capital or any real big city, and he was dead sure this town had zero worth. Gabus leaned in and asked Kairat what he'd decide about the newbie, then kept going, saying that if they set up the branch, even this ghost town would finally bloom again. He stumbled back to his late grandmother's house, totally baffled, after catching a quick, eerie flicker of her presence inside. Staring at her photo, he leaned in and whispered that he'd carry out her wish at the festival. A woman finally spilled the truth. Grandma Alice, the immortal witch, vanished without a trace before last year's festival. Hope suddenly sparked in his eyes. Maybe she'd come back again this year. With the town's 2010 anniversary creeping closer, he threw together a stall, just in case fate needed him. Shiro didn't chase food. He smashed down wild Bond ideas instead, tossing out risky, unfamiliar festival styles one after another. With zero patience, he dove into his childhood, hunting for the inspiration he'd buried in forgotten memories, ready to stand out. It hit him like a lightning bolt. Photography was the answer, and suddenly he remembered those old cameras he'd tucked away in storage. Cairo leaned into Aina's ear and told her cameras weren't just gadgets. They could freeze those precious moments and turn them into a real business. He tested the magic for real, watched Aina light up into a smile, and then blasted the results onto the screen for everyone to see. Aina gaped at her photo, frozen by the thought that her image might actually get printed. Shiro broke down how that device snared moments in midair, then urged her to grab the camera herself and start snapping even more. Soon, Aina beamed with pure excitement, flashing big smiles and peace signs while the camera clicks rang out everywhere. She clutched the camera tight, double-checked the button, flashed a huge grin, and snapped Shiro's photo back. Aina couldn't wait to find out, so she peppered Shiro with eager questions. He simply nodded and flashed a grin, sealing her win. Even with Shiro insisting nobody needed his photos, he still kept striking pose after ridiculous pose, all swagger and confidence. Aina got hooked on this other camera she found, because the Polaroids could pop out a photo instantly, pure instant print magic that left her stunned. Aina eagerly snapped a candid shot, then hated how she looked and pouted at Shiro's shocked reaction. With revenge sparking in her eyes, Aina zoomed in on Shiro for a snap, before he even had time to react. The photo snapped the moment into focus, Shiro's wide-eyed, awkward grin, and then the payback landed, both of them bursting into laughter right there, like instant revenge. While lost in memories, Shirapanda pours her heart into a heartfelt haiku, sparked by her grandma's old peace sign gesture. Later, Stella finally showed up, eyes shining with gratitude, and she couldn't stop thanking Shiro for taking care of her daughter again. They kicked back and chatted about Stella's fresh move, then Shiro's thoughtful move, renting them a place to stay, lit up the whole moment. Aina called out Stella's messy cleaning, and even the adults cracked up at the kids' brutally honest candor. Even though Stella's cheeks burned, Shiro leaned in and offered to help, while Aina hesitated, like she could feel the real message still hadn't been spoken. Shiro let out this awkward little laugh when Aina called him out. Turns out he's just as bad at cleaning as everyone says. With a bright, cheerful grin, Aina waved goodbye, practically glowing from how much fun she'd had helping Shiro. As they headed out, Shiro reminded them to watch their steps, grinning like they'd just pulled off another peaceful, productive day. The Silver Moon Guild, once nearly lost to time, flung open its doors again under the fairies' blessing and guild authority. The moment he stepped in, the whole hall went dead silent, until emerald-tinted sobs shattered the stillness. Then the adventurers surged inside, trading fresh reports and staring in disbelief as the guild proved it really had come back from the dead. Emil teased him without mercy, clocking that he'd come to see her with secret romantic motives. She'd daydream about marriage and regal carriages, towering castles, even dragons, anything if it meant a life of pure gold and comfort. Without a second thought, Emil started unbuttoning her top, insisting she was hot and drowning in affection. Right when he tried to slip out, she leaned in close and sweet-talked him into grabbing drinks in that quiet little room. He suddenly remembered his grandmother's last warning, never trust a tipsy woman in a private moment again. Feigning innocence, Emil snapped that he'd yanked her close, claiming she was the real victim all along. She closed the distance in a blink and rained kisses on him as he screamed for a rescue, like right now. Out of nowhere, Shiro got a fierce kick whizzing past him, so perfectly aimed it cut straight through the chaos. Gulfast slammed down in a dramatic landing, flashing a proud grin as he intercepted the spiraling chaos at the last second to lend a crucial hand. Back in the guild hall, they clinked mugs and finally exhaled, savoring hard-earned peace after all that brutal emotional damage. While Shiro was busy recovering, the others started picking apart Emel's moves like it was no big deal at all, like this kind of stunt happened every day. Right when peace finally hit, Emil came storming back, jealous, dramatic, and itching to start it all over again. Tensions snapped inside the guild as a reckless fighter stepped up and dared a smug, bookish adventurer to a fight. Shiro didn't step in at all. He just watched with this unnerving calm, like a spectator at a show, while guild brawls were treated as a daily bonding ritual around here. After 2 whole months of hunting for ruins with sky-high hopes, they came back empty-handed, nothing, not a trace. Tempers flared and patience were already out of the way, so even the smallest squabbles detonated into full-on fistfights between guildmates. Boredom gnawed, tension simmered, and isolation shut everyone in, and Emel's non-stop antics only cranked the chaos higher. M.O. leaned in, cheeks flushed, and made it painfully clear Reia's distraction wasn't some kid stuff, it was definitely the adult kind. Shiro tried to play innocent, but the second he missed the brothel reference, the teasing hit hard and he just blushed, totally caught. A brutal jab to the foot shut down every excuse, and accusations of laziness ricocheted around the table. While the tavern roared through the brawl, multiple voices shouted at Shiro to shut down the flirting. The guildmaster stormed in with a thunderous glare, and just like that, every fight froze and nearly everyone's heart skipped. The adventurer scrambled to clear his name as the guildmaster's scowl slammed down, and a brutal silence filled the air. With perfect grace, the guildmaster let out a teasing chuckle, apologized to Shiro, and slyly glanced at that one bunny like it meant something. She spotted Emal hiding, grabbed her by the moment, and demanded to know why she hadn't stepped in to shut down the earlier chaos. With Emil stumbling away in defeat, a knight rode up to Shiro and handed over a bizarre favor. On a wild ruin expedition, they pushed deep into the forest and stumbled on rare flowers nobody had found in ages. Shiro jumped at the chance to join the expedition, trusting his friend's strength to keep him safe through every danger. Once everything was set, they clinked their mugs together and officially kicked off the next wild journey into the unknown. The group stumbled on glowing white lilies, opening up under the sun like tiny beacons in a calm, quiet field. Shiro figured them out, Epsara, rare flowers that only bloom where the water stays crystal clean and untouched. Lost in the blooms, they kept thinking of Aina, so desperate that they wished she could have seen this moment with her own eyes. Their break got yanked to an abrupt stop the moment orders barked in. Work had to resume while the daylight was already slipping away fast. Just a week back, they stumbled across these flowers, must-have ingredients for powerful, top-tier healing potions. Halfway home, even with magical watering and non-stop protection, the Apsara started to wither and fade. Instead of throwing in the towel, the group clung to Shiro's rare gift, the one chance that could keep them safe. With his dimensional inventory ready, Shiro stashed the flowers away, freezing time itself and slamming the clock shut on their decay. Right before they left, the air suddenly rippled with something wrong. Everyone's eyes snapped to it as an unnatural presence barreled toward them. Suddenly, a horde of giant flying beetles ripped out of the sky, their wings whirring like a threat. 17 massive beetles ringed the clearing, and a few limped through the chaos, already torn up from their last brutal fight. Up close, you could see fresh injuries, like a sharp wind spell had just ripped through the area, and it was still hanging around. The creatures clocked the group's panic, and right as chaos erupted, orders started flying and spells snapped into existence. Neska flicked her staff, and a brutal fiery arrow tore through the sky, blasting straight into the swarm. Rolf threw himself in front of Shiro, snapping his shield up just in time to slam down on the charging insect menace. Even with a bullseye hit, the beetle didn't even flinch. Kulfas snapped into action and slammed it with a brutal counterattack. Neska unleashed another blazing spell, pouring in even deadlier magic as Kilfa tore the nearest enemies off her target. Shiro clocked their elemental weakness, fire, then snatched a canister and swore it wasn't just some lame bug spray. No hesitation, he snapped the lighter shut, flared the sparks into the air, and watched them collide with the vapor mid-flight. Shiro thrust his hands forward, and a homemade flamethrower detonated in a roaring blaze, blasting straight into the charging swarm. Shiro threw the signal, and Rolf rocketed forward with everything he had, set to smash the final wave into dust. Rolf's fist came down like a hammer. One brutal blow shattered the beetle's head, cracked the carapace wide, and sprayed its deadly fluid everywhere. Morals roared as each fighter slammed in with fresh fury. Blades whirred through the air, and spells erupted in perfect sync. Beetles dropped one after another, while the coordination-type squad desperately called Churro in support from every flank came rushing in. Watching how far they'd come, Shiru broke into a smile, because that blue flash crew had blown past its humble beginnings. A swarm of beetles crashed in on Nesca, and Shiro's eyes snapped to her, his mind sprinting through every possible move. He hesitated with the flamethrower at the ready, terrified the blast radius would burn Nesca in that raging firestorm. As Nesca staggered, Shiro burst forward on instinct, shouting her name as he threw himself in front of the deadliest danger. Two burly beetles launched in late and smashed Shiro with a brutal hit. His body snapped and twisted as pain slammed him. With lightning speed, Rhea bolted to the river's edge and screamed at everyone to jump, because anything else would invite the next wave of attacks. Shiro got slammed around by the raging current, fighting for every breath while barely keeping his hand above the water. Nesca hurled up protective magic, begging the river's spirit to shield Shiro from any more damage. As he drifted off, Rhea blurted out, desperate as ever, swearing they'd track him down and rescue him no matter what. Shiro drifted into unconsciousness, spiraling in a fog of fear. Was rescue racing toward him, or had it already passed too late? He jolted awake on the rocky shore, coughing hard, choking on air as his trembling crew lay all soaked through. Bursting out of the forest, a winged girl swooped into view and declared, "I'm a fairy," before the moment crushed under a wave of confused silence. As Shiro stalked through the forest, he saw a real fairy hover right in front of his face. Caught in her wide-eyed stare, the fairy jolted in embarrassment, and he snapped his gaze away fast, apologizing as he did Without a warning, a girl suddenly burst in, yelling that she'd hauled him out of the jaws of death after he started drowning by a killer waterfall. Confessing about the river chaos, Shiro admitted he hadn't been carelessly splashing around. He'd been running for his life from monsters. The moment she heard Nina Rich, the fairy choked on a gasp. She swore it was a far-off human town she'd once heard about. She blurted out an urgent request to go to Ninorich, and it completely blindsided Shiro with her sudden, unshakable determination. Even with doubts clawing at her, Shiro finally nodded as she painted the picture, how she once met a gentle humus with sky-blue hair, and how she'd been searching for someone just like that. Her hazy description threw him off. He had to spell it out. Not every fume is automatically familiar with the others. She admitted she'd never once learned his real name. She'd always just called him Hume, like that was all she needed when Shiro asked if they were lovers, she instantly panicked, flushing hard as she snapped back, clearly annoyed at the idea. She said it with steel in her voice, no romance, not even a spark, just friends, but that bond hit hard. When they asked her about the forest, she lit up and proudly admitted she was born and raised right inside it. Shiro pitched a wild deal. He'd guide her to Ninorich, but only if she helped him first. She jumped at the offer, swore she'd guard him with her life, and then blasted her magical wind technique to prove it. A fierce slash carved through the forest, and Shiro couldn't help but be blown away by her raw power and surgical combat skill. Proud as she was of her power, she still admitted the truth. Magic control wasn't her gift, and the moment she tried, the trees got shredded. She bragged about taking down the beetles, and it shocked Shiro, because he suddenly realized she was the one behind that earlier destruction. Right before sealing their travel pact, Shiro Amara and Patty Falulu finally introduced themselves like, "Okay, so this is who we are." She stepped forward and declared herself the commander, demanding Shiro call her boss, even as his mild grumbles tried to resist the title. He poured on the enthusiasm to wow his Shiro-repeating boss, and Patty's face lit up. She cheered like crazy, all fired up for it. Shiro played along like some goofy servant for a second, then snapped and shut that whole ridiculous act down. No way. Beneath the moonlit sky, he put on a stiff, formal voice, promising service and repayment for the rescue. Later, huddled by the fire, Patty leaned in and asked if he still missed his friends from the human world. When she heard his answer, she shot back, "I'll help you search, because yeah, she runs the whole place." She proudly offered them food, then leaned in and insisted, like only a real leader would, that she was just doing the right thing for her subordinates. Patty casually tore open a magical portal, and Shiro's eyes went wide when he realized she had the rare, ridiculously powerful inventory skill. But the girl casually fires off those inventory skills, and the merchant's stunned, because she's so calm and confident it's almost unreal. She tells him fairies can do stuff like this, then casually yanks items right out of that glowing portal like it's nothing. Soon she hands him homemade mead, practically nudging him to drink it, so he can get warm before nightfall hits. While he sips and unwinds, she shoots upward, orders him to rest, and takes the watch herself. Beneath the moon's glow, he whispers his thanks to her, and with her watching quietly from above, he finally feels safe. Gasping for air, the crew huddles up and argues about the forest's threats: ogres, goblins, and even elves lurking behind barriers. They stop again, breathing hard. Patty springs forward, spotting a baboona flower and warning, "Don't trust the nectar. It tastes weird." Shiro remembers downing it by mistake once, then she barrels into him with a whole flood of new facts, unstoppable as ever. So he learns that Gehenna used to be a whole nation, then it suddenly collapsed, and the forest swallowed it up. Suddenly, Patty's instincts scream that danger's close, so she snaps, "Hide," and makes zero room for questions. Tense voices ricocheted through the forest as Shiro's friends tore into the trees, praying the worst wasn't waiting. A talking cat looked them in the eye and swore he was alive, and the whole crew surged forward, hope roaring back to life. When Shiro heard those familiar voices creeping close, he jolted upright on instinct, while Patty spiraled into panic, and he just snapped back, brushing off her warning. When they finally reunited, he grinned with heartwarming pride and claimed them as his friends, his loyal, irreplaceable companions who stuck with him through every fight. His roar finally hit their ears, and they sprinted toward it, gasping with racing hearts, pure relief crashing in. Right as Shiro called out, Pilfa came rocketing in from above, beaming and yelling his name at the top of her lungs. Mid-flight, she slammed into him like a meteor, rattling the whole scene. Everybody jumped, and her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she sobbed, clinging to him like her life depended on it, swamped by sheer relief and sharp fear. Shiro flashed a gentle smile and swore he was fine, while his companions broke down, clung to him, and wouldn't let go for a second. Grateful and crushed by guilt, the others swore they'd keep Shiro safe and repay his unshakable courage. Even though the reunion blindsided him, Shiro broke into a proud smile, quietly thanking every star that he was finally back with his friends. A knight basked in praise for surviving, then quickly admitted, humble as ever, that he didn't make it back alone through the forest. He introduced Patty, this powerhouse fairy who'd saved him, and suddenly his new ally became an unexpected kind of boss. The whole group stared in disbelief. Fairies never mix with outsiders, and Shiro's connection to her totally blew everyone's minds. With a shaky breath, she confessed she'd broken the rules, because normally, fairies stay hidden, never daring to stray far from their secret home. While Shiro laughed off the talk of fairies, the others suddenly realized he had zero clue about their customs. That book spilled the truth. Fairy's blessing wasn't sacred at all. It was a rare fairy-brewed alcohol. Everybody went dead silent when he casually admitted he'd been drinking it, and the shock only doubled when Patty confirmed the whole story. Shocked silence hit the whole room when Shiro confessed he'd unknowingly gulped down that ultra-rare mythical fairy mead. Old records say not a single drop ever showed up for over 200 years. Can you imagine? Fresh air at last, the adventurers rushed to thank Patty, only for her to puff up and brag that Shiro was her very own underling. When they were asked to help find that person, the whole group didn't even hesitate. They instantly said yes, even though nobody had a clue what their face looked like, too. With fresh allies at their backs, the party charged back into the forest, straight for Myra Ridge. Patty burst into a grin and pointed across the wide plains, where that distant human settlement shimmered like a promise beneath the looming mountains. As they closed in, the group clarified the settlement terms, and Patty lit up, proudly insisting they explore together. Inside the town, a young girl stood completely still, her eyes locked on Shiro as she stared from the alleyway. Shiro clocked her at once and sprinted toward her, and when she clutched him tight with that sudden wave of relief, he felt it hit like lightning. Tears poured down his face as he clutched his arm tight, choking out his own name over and over while he fought to get any words out. When Shiro finally slipped back home, Stella rushed him with warm relief. She'd been up all night, tossing and turning, terrified. Even when help was offered, she snapped it away, determined to carry Ine herself before her strength ran out. She refused to let go of her daughter, soaking in every precious second. She knew they wouldn't get to replay again. With a soft smile, Stella snapped into position and made it crystal clear. She wasn't someone's daughter, she was her daughter. Before he left, Shiro whipped around, said a proper goodbye, and gave Stella and Ine a heartfelt farewell that sounded like he meant every word. Stella flashed him a warm smile, and sleepy Ina peeked out from behind her like she was sneaking in. With dark clouds rolling over his head, he tilted his gaze upward and murmured, "I'm back," as he announced his return to his old home. Inside, Patty gaped at how huge the space was, totally blown away by the sheer size of Shiro's house. Cairo asked about fairy homes, and Patty lit up as she bragged about their tree-cloaked houses, raised high and guarded from monsters. promising to start the search tomorrow, and his words hit like fireworks. She broke into a grin and threw a cheerful celebration. Then he grilled him about fairy mead, and Patty told him it's easy, if honey's on hand. She flinched at the memory of that vicious bee attack, while he casually yanked out a jar of honey like nothing could touch him. Patty's jaw dropped as the honey hit, so pure it shimmered, then she licked it eagerly, eyes wide with stunned, sparkling wonder. With delight lighting up her face, she swore her next mead batch would be even more mind-blowing. Travel wore Cairo out, and he crumpled onto the couch, soaking up the comfort like it was finally a break after sleeping out in the cold again. Inez slowly jolted awake, standing beside the couch with a razor-sharp, determined look on her face. Without a second thought, she climbed onto him and blurted out that Stella had sent food all the way from home. Patty jolted upright mid-conversation, eyes narrowing as she demanded to know who this mysterious girl was. Inez beamed as she introduced herself, practically buzzing with disbelief. She couldn't believe she was finally meeting a real fairy, just like the ones in her books. As curiosity clawed at her, Patty finally asked who she was, and Shiro spilled the truth. She'd helped him at work. He started grilling people about the blue-haired guy, but she and Inez came up empty. No one matched the description. Even with no clues on the board yet, Shiro kept his chin up, insisting they'd track him down if they just pressed a little harder and asked around more. Inez practically begged to jump into the search on the spot, while reminding them she still had to be hidden somewhere. Suddenly fired up, she pointed out the perfect hiding spot for Patty, twirling on her toes and lifting her dress hem to show where to go. Peeking out with nerves on full blast, she blushed hard and still nodded yes, determined to stay hidden while they swept the whole town for answers. Patty was shoved deep inside Ina's backpack, and the three of them burst through town to track down Shiro's friend. Shiro strode up to the townspeople clutching the pendant, praying anyone, would spot its one-of-a-kind design. He cornered vendor after vendor, beastfolk and travelers too, hounding everyone nonstop, but all he got were friendly shrugs or flat-out disinterest. Specialists and merchants tossed out wild theories, but not a single record lines up with the pendant's shape, its stone, or where it came from. Even sketchy informants and tough locals shut him down fast, waving him off without so much as a second look. After 27 dead-end questions, Shiro finally realized the pendant's truth wasn't just hidden, it was buried deeper than anyone could have guessed. A fresh clue surfaced about the missing girl. She was said to have once lived in Norwich, but locals still haven't confirmed it. Karen burst into the scene and nearly stopped in her tracks when she spotted Shiro nearby, shocked, but bursting with relief that he was finally okay again. She grilled him over his reckless choices, bringing up Ria's party, while Shiro scrambled to explain why he'd gone silent. Even though Karen was worried, she broke into a warm smile and soothed him with a gentle, calming hand gesture. Their moment got yanked to a stop when another villager snatched up the pendant, and curiosity flared across her face. Karen locked eyes with the pendant, recognition sparked in her chest, but the exact memory stayed just out of reach before she walked out. She swore she'd come back the moment the pendant's origin slipped back into her mind. When she turned away, Shiro blurted out, asking if she was going to see Emil again. She didn't answer, she cut straight to it, declaring her real mission, confronting the Blue Flash party for putting Shiro in danger. Laughing off his protests, Karen strode away like she owned the place, leaving Shiro flustered, and he just stood there yelling after her for nothing. After Karen left, Inez's nerves spiked as she asked Shiro and Patty if they'd sleep right beside her tonight. Patty's cheeks flared as she feigned indifference, but she still took the request, swearing it was only temporary. At her aunt's place, Aina welcomed her mother with a bright smile, then got ready to finally spill the secret she'd been guarding with her life. Her mother flashed a smile full of curiosity, totally blind to how much danger was hiding behind her daughter's shaky voice. Buzzing with excitement, Inez plunged her hand into her bag, and the suspense skyrocketed as her mother started dreaming up some weird, totally squishy surprises. Patty burst out of the bag, stunned to see just how closely Aina looked like her mother. Everything froze, Aina's mother, when she finally startled herself by spotting a fairy girl inside the backpack. Meanwhile, Patty bounced across the bed, grinning ear to ear as the softness and comfort blew her mind. Over tea, Inez leaned in close, eyes shining, and asked Shiro what kind of man he really was. With their questions pounding her, Patty finally caved with a heavy sigh and agreed to spill every last detail. Patty started spilling her story, flashing back to the very moment she first stepped out of her mystical forest home. Wandering off, she suddenly spotted a hunter in full panic, lunging and failing again and again to catch a jackalope. She watched him keep missing, then burst into laughter so hard tears rolled down her face, completely entertained by his pathetic yet fiercely determined attempts. Eventually, her patience snapped, and she unleashed magic to help him crush the creature. In awe, the boy stared at her, eyes wide and shining, like gratitude was lighting up every breath. The boy gawked at her wings, stunned speechless. Then it hit him. He was staring at a real fairy. He dropped to his knees in stunned silence, the rich flavor crushing him as he tasted cooked jackalope meat through quiet tears. Days without food had him shaking. This ragged man finally blurted out he was starving, while everyone else fought to keep their courage as they struggled through the meal. With gratitude in his chest but nerves on his tongue, he asked her name. She smirked and kept it secret, then flipped the whole moment into a test of his skills. Sunlight blasted through the treetops, the moment their uneasy alliance kicked off, and somehow this morning burned even brighter than the last. Under her watchful eye, every crushing loss and brutal fight honed his aim, until confidence crept back in, step by step. And after nailing his hunt, confidence surged, so he asked again, proud and determined, for the name she'd once refused to give. Out of nowhere, a brutal memory crashed into her mind, rejection, right in her face, and fear froze her on the spot, cutting off every word. Even miles apart, she still felt their bond, and remembered how he'd looked her in the eye and called them friends. No matter what it took, she poured out her feelings, begging to be reunited. She wanted to finally tell him her name and hear his in return. Tears streamed down her face, and the girls swore they'd help her search, no matter what it cost. As her friends shouted their promise again, strength surged through her, and when the words of her name landed, the night finally fell, not broken, but empowered. Far away, a man basked in calm comforts, completely oblivious as trouble crept in, soft as a whisper, ready to smash his peace. Rhea's sudden burst into the scene tore through the calm, forcing everyone to drop what they were doing and deal with his battered body right now. Wounds crisscrossed his face, yet he laughed it off with a forced smile, like he was hiding the real pain underneath. Miles didn't wait for judgment to drop. He stood his ground in front of the mayor, ready to take the entire blame, and right then the moment hit. A brutal slap hit like thunder, and in its sting, forgiveness was delivered, not with words but with sheer force. Moments later, the tension finally cracked open. An invite to the guild appeared, promising lighter spirits and the kind of company you actually want to be around. Around the table, laughter and drinks burst into the air as their friends counted down, ready to explode into cheers. Smiles stretched wide as their voices rang out, old companions together again, savoring the shared celebration and that warm, tear-tinged reunion. Even with the laughter flying, a real understanding quietly clicked into place between them, built on truths they'd both been too scared to say out loud. With alcohol running short, everyone stopped and stared at the growing tavern tension, and then crunched the brutal price of their supplies. Some people craved cider or wine anyway, even when the local stuff tasted sour, and left them sorely disappointed. Jokes flew around the table, as the wine revealed a way bigger cultural clash between worlds. Surprise exploded in the room when he broke down red wine, white wine, and the rare rouse, like he was spilling secrets. Charles Fahey mapped out flavor ranges, price tiers, and regional twists, turning a casual drink. With every gaze locked on him, he stumbled through a nervous explanation of his homeland's world-spanning alcohol trade. Cheers tore through the table, but his mind was already sprinting, because he could feel something bigger than just casual admiration. A bolt of inspiration hit. Importing alcohol could kick off a cross-world business empire, so unstoppable it'd make every other venture look doomed, right? He shot to his feet and laid out a plan that promised a whole stack of wins all at once. With a swaggering grin, he swore he'd be back in 3 days, hauling drinks straight from his world. Under the moon's glow, he marched toward the hall, his heart dragging like stone and a ruthless determination pulsing in every step. Tonight, Shiru dressed sharply, not for fighting, but for something personal and completely unpredictable. Inside the guild bar, Aina and Stella lit up as they greeted him warmly, totally blown away by how elegant he looked. A ragtag bar was set up and waiting. Shiro hijacked the drinking hall and turned it into Bar Shiro, all by himself. While kids begged to pitch in, Nesca blasted ice magic to chill their drinks, and Shiro's weird evening was only just getting started. Cairo grinned and handed out drinks to his crew. Each guy picked his own favorite liquor, wine, or something nice and mild. The crowd started to fidget and roar, each person yelling louder for a taste of those drinks. Right in front of them, Shiro puffed out his chest and proudly introduced himself. Then he slammed the moment into motion, declaring the bar officially open for a full-on celebration. He cracked open drinks from his shop, piled out the snacks he'd cooked himself, and somehow lifted the whole crowd's spirits with pure generosity. He coughed up 3 million yen, but tonight he grinned anyway, every drop of that feast was on him, freely given. Toe snapped the door shut, and Shiro rolled out Mirage, the graceful guildmaster, for the final words, blessings, and good luck before everything wrapped up. The crowd surged forward in a frenzy, nearly trampling Shiro as cheers thundered through the guild hall. Mirage smoothed the whole room into calm with pure grace, while Rhea prowled for a drink from Shiro's impressive collection. Anna slid in a tipad of lime juice, and Rhea snatched it up, staring at her with curious eyes, totally hooked by the idea. One sip hit Rhea with a gentle fizz, then bam, sour zest detonated into pure delight, and her eyes went wide with instant, thrilling shock. Rhea's drink shot to instant fame. Everyone in the place clamored for it, hooked on that sharp lime kick and the wild salt twist. Orders kept blasting in nonstop, and Aina and Stella scrambled behind the bar, fighting to keep up with every single request. Right away, the next customer cut in front, demanding something powerful, and the moment it hit, confidence flared in the shopkeeper's chest behind the counter. Eldos, the legendary warrior, demanded the request, and the whispers tore through the streets. Then he went hunting for the strongest drink anyone could find. Link grinned and lifted the bottle, 96% proof spiritus, so hot it could ignite on the spot. With a tiny glass clutched in his hand, Eldos grumbled, his pride ignited at being treated like a child. Even after they warned him that the alcohol was deadly strong, he doubled down, bragging to everyone that it couldn't touch him, claiming he was completely immune to getting drunk. Suspicious of a scene, Shiro begged Eldos for reason, but Eldos threw the brakes off and braced for escalation instead. Tension snapped into place. He slammed his hand down and dared Shiro to go toe-to-toe right there, over drinks. A calm voice cut through the silence, and Rolf, priest of Florine, marched up to Eldos, introducing himself with full formality. Pride mocked him, but Eldos still defended his heritage booze from the day he was born, honor hammered into his soul by dwarven tradition. Rolf shot back a magical fix. His healing spell could instantly blast the alcohol out of Eldor's body. Everyone nodded, because if Eldos ever crumpled, Rolf would bring him back to life. No one raised a hand to argue the deal. Eldos swaggered on the strength of past monster-slaying wins, scoffing at weakness as memories of brutal beast fights came roaring back. With a blazing wager, Eldos swore he'd obey the moment he faltered, betting his pride on one thing, undeniable proof. Eldos thrust up a full barrel and demanded it with a grin, then swore those wager-free drinks would flow forever. Alcohol streamed into the room and Shiro nodded, ready to sign on to the deal, while Eldos grimaced at how the smell hit him, all sharp and unfamiliar. With eyes narrowed, he tipped the barrel and started chugging right away, leaving everyone staring in disbelief at his fearless speed. Gulps echoed through the room as the crowd gawked in shock, watching him drain every last drop with zero breaks. Breath ragged, he finally finished. Heat tore through his body, and burning pain sank deep in his gut. Eldos smirked like he owned the room and demanded confirmation, and Shiro finally threw in the towel. He'd seriously misread exactly how far his guest could go. Eldos declared himself the winner, and the laughter exploded. Then he swaggered up, demanding lifetime drinks like his victory was sealed in gold. Moments later, dizziness hit like a truck. Cheers died instantly as Eldos crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he could even finish celebrating. The hero crumpled right after downing too much, and Erdo kept his cool, dragging him back with a calm scold and a warning that one more slip could have stolen his life, and that spell was the only reason he wasn't gone. With his head hanging low, the hero sat there, crushed and speechless, while the crowd muttered that alcohol had finally toppled someone this powerful. News sprinted through the crowd, and before long everyone started calling that drink Hero Slayer. People across the land laughed at the liquor that fell to heroes. Eurofree bottles got thrust into their hands, and adventurers roared with joy, downing every last sip until they couldn't stand. Some shouted that it tasted amazing, while others immediately vowed to sneak some home and share it with their families. Behind the counter, the merchant flashed a grin, and yeah, the bill was steep, but it paid off fast. Giving them alcohol to win their loyalty was a small price to lock in a long-term win. Tension snapped in the tavern as Shiro handed out delivery duties, one punch away from a brawl, until he stayed ice calm and shut it down, selling it as a little stress relief for the whole group. Laughter burst through the air as they traded playful slaps, and Shiro just stayed cool, watching the whole mess like it was nothing, totally dependable, even while everything exploded with noise. Questions didn't stay light for long, when Guy spotted fairy wings in the box and pressed Shiro about why he was really hunting adventurers, and Shiro shot back with a guarded smile. A staff member marched up and asked if Shiro had found his friend. Shiro's silence answered it all, and only then did he murmur a quiet, defeated acknowledgement. He let out a soft apology in that secret little corner nearby, while the girl curled up all alone, No one heard her, no one saw her, not even her own friend. Shiro had only hoped to find. Alone in that quiet room, the girl curled up tight and whispered an apology for all the trouble she'd caused, while Shiro stayed at the counter, still hunting for answers. Days dragged on and rain hammered the rooftops. No matter how hard everyone searched, Shiro's friend never turned up, and the hope that once burned bright finally died out. They grilled him about the necklace, shoved posters in everyone's faces, and marched town to town, but every lead died fast because nobody had seen him, and the trail straight up went ice cold. Fresh questions erupted, and if hums really bounced across so many regions, maybe that friend just vanished into the distance, and honestly, the options felt limitless. With search options everywhere, doubt crept in fast. She just stared out the window, heart pounding, thinking, how are they even supposed to find someone who's lost in a world this huge? Karen strolled in with a grim face and clutched a box, then calmly told them she might just know exactly who they were hunting. She popped the box open, and out gleamed a crystal necklace. The second Shiro saw it, recognition hit like lightning because he'd seen that exact same necklace before. Karen traced the necklace's roots back. Turns out it once belonged to her great-grandfather, the very first mayor of Nenrich. To make the link crystal clear, they sketched a family tree, and suddenly even the younger ones could see just how deep that lineage went. Karen snapped, baffled by his demand, and demanded to know why Shiro was hunting for her ancestor. Then Shiro looked her straight in the eye and confessed, with total sincerity, that he was the one who started the whole search. Karen's mouth dropped when the girl finally revealed she was a fairy, and Shiro just stood there in stunned silence as everything clicked into place right in front of them. Once Karen finally swallowed the truth, it hit her. Her ancestor really had met a fairy, but the girl didn't even hesitate. She pushed forward fast like something was burning. She pushed to explain the link. If Karen really was his descendant, then she had to know where he ended up. Karen got totally thrown off by her assumptions, because the girl kept insisting that someone in the family must have secretly handed down where he'd been. Karen froze and the pieces finally clicked. Those connections weren't random at all, because the truth they'd buried for generations was starting to break through. Karen asked, how long do fairies live? And Patty froze mid-step on the stairs, then said, around 3,000 years in me. I'm only 300. That reply finally snapped everything into place. Hum said barely 100, Karen explained, then her eyes whipped to Shiro, and he just stood there, already seeing the truth staring right back at him. The truth hit hard. The guy they were hunting was already dead, his memory slipping away long ago, and none of them knew him well enough to hold on. Old memories crashed into Patty's mind like a storm, rejection, fear, and isolation clinging to her, even though all she ever wanted was one real chance to connect. The accusations kept screaming back, cruel and uninvited, banish her, because nobody ever stood between them and her, and hope finally died when the worst truth proved itself. Under the cold glow of the window, she sat frozen in place, crushed by a tidal wave of worthlessness, so bad even her own family had turned away from her. In a pitch-black, moonless night, she had nothing left to lose, so she tore out of the village and swallowed up the forest shadows. A stranger materialized deep in the woods, and for the very first time, someone stared at her with nothing but kindness, not fear, not disgust. Gratitude flooded his face as he thanked her, and she wouldn't give her name until he chased and won his dream. Then his smile sparked something warm inside her. Her old silence shattered, laughter surged in its place, while they trained, played, and chased new adventures, and suddenly those shared days turned into memories she'd cherish forever, because for the first time, she truly felt like she mattered. She'd never felt real conflict before, but that day, a raw fight erupted, and for the first time, she stood her ground. The moment they discovered it, everything changed. Down in the dirt, joy broke through, and the digging stopped feeling like work, because laughter finally came easy. Danger slammed into her without warning, razor-sharp claws, heavy breaths, and a beast that didn't even blink, and she just stood there, frozen, watching someone leap between her and death. He didn't hesitate. Every strike he swung screamed the same thing. He'd protect her, even if it cost him everything. Pinned in the dirt, breathing hard, he grinned and offered her a necklace. Now we match, he said, because that gift snapped their bond into place and proved she wasn't alone anymore. Outstretched hands didn't just hand over a gift. They carved out a real bond, stamped it with matching necklaces, and backed it with nothing but honest intent. Even if miles stretched between them, that token would still cling to their bond. It wasn't just a little trinket, it was a promise they couldn't break. He talked about best friends, and the words landed in her chest like a shock, almost impossible to believe, because nobody had ever said something like that to her before. She leaned in as he broke down what it meant, closer than friends, the kind of bond where you'd both stake everything on each other, and the title felt brand new but somehow still warm. Her heart slammed into her like a wave, and tears burst into her eyes out of nowhere. This time, they weren't from pain or rejection, they poured out of pure joy. He asked for her name, softly nudging her back to that promise, and when she smiled, the nervous air around her tightened like the whole moment was pressing down. The words were on the tip of her tongue, but hesitation slammed the brakes, because the moment she said her name, she feared the connection they'd built would shatter. She told them to hold it off for next time, but deep down, dread clung to her, because saying the name felt like it would slam the door on everything. He accepted it without a second thought, then turned away, while she stood there, silent, gripping hope with one hand and hesitation with the other, refusing to say the name. Patty stood on the deck, staring at the empty spot where he used to stand, her safe place, her whole refuge, until it was just gone, and she couldn't believe how fast it happened, so suddenly. When they pressed her about her plans, Patty cracked. She had no place to go back to. The village threw her out, and even the fairies wouldn't take her in. Her voice shook as she fought to explain. Without a second thought, she exposed a secret mark carved into her skin. Her face stayed calm, but the whole room suddenly felt heavier, and under her fingertips the symbol glimmered faintly. That crest, this cursed mark of ruin, haunted her kind, and everyone feared it. If you were born with it, you got cast out, trapped in loneliness with no one to stay. That betrayal crushed her. Her parents threw her away, and she spiraled into the dark wish she'd never existed. But now she stood her ground, bearing the truth she'd been forced to hide, with zero shame. A swarm of flyshell bugs crashed into the forest, swarming the fairies until they were buried in sheer numbers. Then the infestation erupted into a tidal wave that wouldn't be stopped. As their nests swelled, their ranks exploded, because with no natural force to stop them, they surged outward and devoured everything in sight, no hesitation at all. Panic slammed into the villagers, and their terror turned into anger. Everyone pointed at her, shouting cruel accusations that blamed her very presence for the disaster. He stepped forward and shut down their claims, his voice slicing through the doubt as he declared that she had nothing to do with the insect showing up. And still she didn't flinch. She finally confessed the truth. She carried a curse everyone feared, and even her name wasn't hers by birth, but something given out of pure pity. Patty Falulu, her name meant the one who rips fate apart, sounded like pure hope until the elders still slapped the word cursed on her and threw her out like she was nothing. She replayed their first meeting in the forest, this desperate move to save a stranger, and back then it felt small, but it lit the fuse for everything that followed. With tears blazing in Aina's eyes, Patty forced a smile through the ache, still hurting, but choosing calm strength, even labeling herself the greater fool. Patty reached out with a trembling gentleness, biting back her own tears, because if Aina broke down, she didn't think she could hold herself together. The merchant kept his calm like a loaded spring, and when that moment finally landed, he leaned in and spoke, ready to push ahead as the space between them started to crackle with what came next. He locked eyes with Patty, calm but unshakable, and asked her straight, did she want to save the other fairies? Without hesitation, Patty blurted, yes. Rejection had already slammed into her once, but her heart refused to turn cold. She couldn't forget the chief who gave her that name, or the parents still trapped in that village, because even after they threw her out, they still lived inside her heart. Standing her ground, Patty doubled down on her choice, hate and old wounds be damned, and she refused to walk away from the people who once felt like her family. With pure determination blazing in her eyes, he grinned like it was obvious and said, if you're gonna save them, then we're saving everyone, right now as one. Patty's hands shook as she begged, can you really do it? And he shot back instantly, of course I can. Her plea rang out and Aina joined in together. They put their faith in him on the spot. He slapped the matter as settled and pushed them forward. Their very first stop was the Adventurers Guild, the one place where they just might find the help they were hunting for. As soon as Shiro brought up the flyshell bugs, whispers exploded through the room, and the crowd went rigid, shocked by just how huge the threat really was. But their hopes got slammed by brutal resistance. The guild clerk flat out refused, swearing it wasn't just impossible, but 200% impossible, and their very first step forward turned into a wall. That flyshell nest was so massive it basically laughed at anyone trying to go in alone. Taking it down would mean launching a full-scale operation with the entire weight of the Adventurers Guild behind it. But most of them were stuck on ruin expeditions instead. This nest sat way out of reach, with zero payoff, and the whole thing would have drained too much manpower and money to be worth it. No options left, the clerk spun away, and Shiro sat there alone, watching his plan crumble in silence. Right before she walked out, Shiro called after her, offering a business deal, not a desperate plea. She froze, stunned, then Shiro's confidence snapped back like a weapon. He wasn't on his knees begging, he was gearing up to make that deal pay off big. A burst of magical light tore through the air, and Shiro snapped his spatial storage skill into action. Then a portal roared open, freezing everyone in the room in pure shock. He stepped forward with eerie calm and slid it over, like this was his deal, his way of throwing down and helping the fight. He laid out his game plan, turned his skill into a supply line. While everyone else chased ruins, he'd haul the resources straight to them, cutting out hours of grind and saving their energy. The guild clerk waited up, smart, fast, and loaded with profit potential. Shiro flashed a confident smile, but she wasn't finished judging it yet. She shot back just as hard, flashing her own spatial magic, proving she could store multiple carriage loads too, and suddenly the whole thing wasn't a plea anymore. It was a negotiation between equals. Even though Shiro pushed with everything he had, the clerk shut him down. Her apology was ironclad, and Aina's eyes brimmed with tears as the last hope slipped away. Right when despair started to creep in, a booming voice slammed into the air, and a towering warrior stepped forward. Shiro spun around, shocked to see Aritos, the man who was about to change everything. Shiro stood there, shaking with nerves, and begged the guild for help with a pest problem in the eastern forest. Then a hulking warrior nearby clocked his panic and stepped right in. Julius sized him up in a heartbeat, and the warrior nodded to Shiro's request without a second thought, leaving Shiro staring in shock, like he couldn't believe it just happened. Still scratching his head, Shiro demanded to know why a guy this deadly would bother with a small job. Then the warrior smirked like he had a whole secret reason stuck in the past. With a booming laugh, the warrior jolted Shiro's memory about that old drunken bet, the challenge that came with strong drink, and the reckless promise that followed. With his weapon held high, the warrior swore he'd back his promise, and even though everyone else said mass exterminations were impossible, he braced himself to prove them dead wrong. Right as Erdos boasted he could handle the mission solo, a band of adventurers burst in, overhearing everything and boldly offering to join the fight. The guildmaster shot in fast, slammed down the official rules, and made it clear that outside quests couldn't be taken without proper mediation. She wasn't about to let that breach slide. Even with the objections flying, they explained everything. Erdos wasn't taking a normal quest at all. He was chasing a personal challenge rooted in an old bet. One of the adventurers made it crystal clear. This wasn't about rewards at all. They were doing it just to back a friend, no pay, no spotlight. Everyone chimed in with the same take. Since there wasn't a reward on the table, it didn't even qualify as an official quest. To them, just stepping in for a friend who needed help was reward enough. Shiro, swamped by everyone's support, forced himself to breathe steady. Then he blurted out a tiny promise, a celebration after the mission, and the nearby adventurers snapped to attention like fireworks had just lit. He casually dropped that rare drink, fairy mead, into the post-mission celebration, and the crowd instantly snapped to attention, shocked and dying to know more. Hearing about the legendary drink, more adventurers leapt at the chance to join in, because the lure of fairy mead was stronger than the fear of what they'd face. Just as the hype hit its peak, a harsh voice cut in, barking everyone into separate tasks, until confusion erupted as duties collided with what people actually wanted. Doubts exploded over whether the fairy mead was the real deal, but Shiro snapped back with his confidence. Then his companions swore it was true too, and the whole group's excitement and resolve shot through the roof. With a flash of motion, the fairy shot forward, leapt with bold pride, and claimed the mead as her own. Then her proof hit like a thunderclap, confirming it was real and leaving everyone stunned. Confusion exploded in the room as a guild member pressed Shiro for answers, and the moment she saw a real fairy, her shock hit her full force. Shiro finally laid it all out. Patty, the fairy, was the one who begged for help, and she didn't want the bug nest wiped out for a reward at all. She needed it destroyed so her fellow fairies could live. Realizing this wasn't some small ask, Shiro bowed so deeply it felt like a vow, because his request wasn't about favors or mead anymore, it was about saving lives. Others snapped into line behind him, and the guild girl promised to brew mead for anyone who lent a hand, because from this point on, our mission had one clear goal: guard the fairy's home. With pure desperation in her voice, the fairy dropped into a deep bow and begged, pleading for help. She was fighting to save the forest, and the family trapped inside it. The guildmaster got hit with the emotional plea and froze, then let out a defeated sigh, realizing she'd been painted as the roadblock and couldn't keep her ground anymore. She snapped her voice up, declared her choice, and as guildmaster she slammed down the order: every available adventurer, prepare and move out right now. The mission was crystal clear: wipe out the flyshell bugs lurking deep in the eastern forest, and warriors, merchants, and mages all came together, bracing themselves to crush the threat head-on. After that brutal long journey, they finally reached it. Right there in front of them, the nest's entrance stood ancient, cracked, and chilling, like it was daring them to step closer. And when the fairy pointed and confirmed it, yeah, this was the place. Cairo and Lyre confirmed the structure in front of them was the real root of the fairy crisis, so the fairies were sealed in place, completely trapped and unable to break free. Guild members spotted it wasn't just a nest at all, it was an ancient ruin, and that whole structure, once nothing but a cave, had slowly warped through the years into a mysterious edifice. Realizing the threat was real, the guildmaster snapped everyone together and laid out the plan, 3 coordinated squads, moving as one, to cut the losses down to a minimum. The elite mithril rank warriors would smash in first, the gold ranks would lock down the exits, and the silver and below would hunt down every last straggler. They dubbed it the Flyshell Bug Destruction Plan, stacked with layers of ranks, exact roles, and razor-precise coordination, so not a single enemy slipped through. Just as the plan was getting locked in, Erdo burst into the battlefield by himself, alone, and everyone froze, because the guildmaster had literally told them to keep him in reserve. His reckless move ripped the plan apart, and the rest of the crew snapped into a new formation in a blink to shield Shiro and everyone else. No hesitation, this crew charged ahead, and right on the heels of the Erdos, they smashed straight into the nest, ripping through every last flyshell bug inside. They huddle outside the cave, clock watching after 2 long hours, and the worry keeps swelling for their comrades still trapped inside. A figure bursts out of the cave, roaring with laughter, certain he's won, then he sneers at their worries and declares the battle over. Inside, that muscular beast thunders, claiming every enemy is wiped out, and his companion just nods, dead serious, because not one single foe is left standing. The group stares through the mess of enemies they tore apart, wondering if there's a queen, or even some final boss, lurking right behind the swarm. But the strong man shuts that down instantly, his stomach growling loud as he chases dinner, instead of getting dragged into more talk. The crew throws a celebration for their win, and one member is absolutely glowing, rubbing it in after their victory over the flyshell bugs. They're buzzing with excitement, then another member blurts out that they should tell the fairies in the cave about their win, but everyone hesitates. Suddenly, a blood-curdling cry for help slices through the air, and panic erupts. Everyone whips around, totally baffled, hunting for where it came from. One of the fairies bolts away in a panic, swearing she'll be back in a flash to jump in and help. A far-off fairy races through the air, then a monstrous creature lunges from nowhere and traps her before she can even scream. The whole group jolts when one fairy lunges for a wind slash to break the creature gripping their comrade, but she hesitates, because she's terrified she'll slice the fairy still trapped in its claws. Fright and rage hit the fairy's companion all at once. He screams at the creature to let her go and then charges straight in, teeth bared. Right then, one of the crew bursts in and goes straight for the monster's weak spot, and the whole team locks in together to rip their captured ally out of danger. A terrifying spell detonates in midair, unleashing a brutal gust of wind that slams the creature and shoves it back hard. A magical icicle spear spears the creature clean through, and the team snaps back control of the fight. The crew rushed to their battered comrade, and with him safe at last, they poured out their thanks to Kilfa and Neska for pulling him out in the nick of time. Lyre and Rawl spin in frantic circles, hunting for their friends and praying they're safe, while they smash their way through a swarm of flyshell bugs. One guy finally clocks it. Things just went from bad to terrifying when a giant swarm of bugs explodes from the nest, trapping them in a buzzing wall of life. They stared in disbelief, as another group member couldn't believe it. How did the bugs slip out of the nest without them even noticing? They realize the nest has a secret escape route, yet it's been jammed shut by the pile of fallen bug bodies. The whole group panics when the fairy blasts a warning that the swarm will crash into the cave where everyone's hiding, unless they move right now. He's not panicking, he's swinging those slashes through the swarm, then he realizes the bugs never stop. One of the team throws out a wild plan to whip up a blazing flame tornado, and everyone locks in, melding their skills and launching the attack together. The attack hits harder than anyone hoped, blasting a huge chunk of the swarm, and as it falls, they erupt in cheers, finally breathing out in relief. A fellow member laughs at Enchan's total lack of magic, poking fun at him like he's nowhere near a real mage. The crew spots the colossal flyshell queen, and when they clock how huge it is, panic hits hard because they know they've got to move now before it swats them. Anshan offers up his skill for one more shot, but right then the queen launches its assault, cranking the pressure to unbearable levels. The queen lunges at them with a terrifying snarl, jaws gaping wide, and Chan braces hard, gripping himself for the counterattack. With one massive smash, a thunderbolt rips through the air, slamming the queen with brutal force and lighting the battlefield on fire. Erdos bursts back in, apologizing for the delay like it's the last thing he's worried about. His arrival flips the battle's tide, and then he unleashes pure fury. Erdos tells Enchan to drop the thanks. He says he's only getting what he's owed, brushing off the gratitude like it's nothing. Erdos proudly shows off a magical war axe named Sigil, hauled from an immortal witch, and he can't wait to swing it for the first time after the wait. Anchan finally catches on. He realizes the axe and Erdos's true justice powers are tied together, and he knows this one-of-a-kind weapon matters more than ever. Erdos tells Enchan that Sigil can unleash true justice's magic twice a day, and the news absolutely electrifies everyone. The whole group erupts in laughter when Eridos finally clocks it, and Chan realizes he's the famous figure's grandchild, the resemblance hitting him instantly. Just as the group starts to move, a shadowy figure crashes in the chief, and he storms forward with this crushing presence that freezes everyone in stunned silence. Amada and Patty stride into the forest, jaws dropped as tiny fairies whirl around them, their delicate wings glittering like sparks as they dance through the air. A strict elder corners Patty, demanding to know why she came back after being banished, and Patty squirms as she insists she meant no harm, yet the pressure between them still crackles. Amada strides forward and drops the bomb. Patty saved his life. The elder leans in, hooked on the twist of how the two are tied together. Amada lays out the whole story of their bond, and the elder can't help but laugh at the irony. Patty, who was once cursed, now rushes in to save other people. The elder slams the warning about the curse's teeth, but Amada doesn't flinch, holding tight to his trust in Patty. Patty's got a mark on her body, the crest, glowing with insane mana, and it screams that she's the chosen one with a truly rare gift. The elder warns that this kind of overwhelming mana always invites trouble. If you don't rein it in, it goes wild, turns savage, and starts wrecking everything in its path. Amada realizes this power won't listen to him unless he learns magic from the ground up, the basics he thought were lost forever. Whoever controls this man has turned into unstoppable sorcerers, pulling off insane feats, yet they're also slammed with terrifying trials. Even with all the misunderstandings swirling around it, that crest still screams one thing: excellence, so don't fear it and don't turn your back on it. Nesco offers to train Patty to master the crushing power of her mana, straight from the prestigious magical arts institution, and dares to smash the elder's dusty old beliefs about those legendary stories. The elder bows low and pours out a heartfelt apology for everything Patty's endured, then tells her, if you can learn to control your mana, you'll become a real game changer for the fairies. On his knees, the elder pleads for mercy, begging forgiveness while he apologizes to both the chief and her grandfather. Patty, overwhelmed to her breaking point, snaps at him to stop, right now. Patty realizes getting banished was the best thing that ever happened, because it shoved her straight to Shiro, and that's how she ended up saving the whole village. The villagers, chief included, stride up to Patty with raw gratitude, sincere eyes shining, and they drop their apologies for what they once did. Tears streaming down her face, Patty swears to them that nobody messed up, and she's got zero grudges. Still kneeling, the elder grips the moment and demands Patty go back to the village, this time as the chief of fairies. Patty hesitates, but Aina, right by her side, won't let her go, clinging tight and proving just how attached she is. Patty realizes if she leaves the hums, she'll be alone again, so she tells Shiro, I came here to find you, but somehow, now I actually feel like I belong. Shiro digs through his ancestors' belongings and uncovers an old, dust-covered letter meant for someone named Karen, and he can't believe what he's found. The letter looks like it was meant for one of his great-great-grandfather's old friends, and that makes it a huge, real clue leading straight to him. Patty's nerves are on fire as she begs him to open it, convinced this thing is the key to something huge. The letter spills a raw, heartfelt message from someone who's been aching to reunite again, even after everything they've endured. Next, Patty's heart cracks the moment she reads the note, and the words yank up her own brutal memories until she breaks down in tears. Shiro lifts a letter he dug up from his ancestors' things, and it points straight to a familiar voice who swears Fairy can live for ages. Patty leans in, and the moment she hears her name mentioned in the letter, she nearly blurts out. She's been saying it to herself the whole time as she read. Aaron steps in and says, I'm the one who sent this letter, thanking Patty for meeting him, then he signs off with a warm, heartfelt note.